I actually like it sometimes when the interview starts and it's not, hi Lane, welcome here. Like we actually just are talking, because when we were sat there and you came over to sit next to me, I was like, I don't know what it was. I was like, I think he's come to tell me something. I knew you wanted to come have a conversation.
Did I actually?
So you were sat.
I remember it was opposite end of the table.
We should set the scene for anyone watching or listening. 2 weeks ago?
About 2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago, in Zonte in El Salvador, we've gone to dinner, and this big group, like 8-10 people. I think Gladstein was there, and Alejandro was there. And we met before? I couldn't remember.
Well, I think we had actually. So when you arrived at the airport, you were in a car. Alex was driving, and you guys dropped Alejandro off.
Yeah.
So you were there. We didn't actually meet that day. I feel like that was our. I think we actually had dinner together a couple nights before, but again, we've been in opposite.
No, I mean previous to El Salvador.
Previous to El Salvador, I don't think so. If it was like in passing.
Right.
But we probably met on Twitter.
Maybe 4. Well, like, so you came and sat down. I was like, and when you sat down, I was like, he wants to have a conversation with me about something. I just knew
or something.
You could sense it, because what happened was you can sense these things.
Sure.
You know, you didn't just sit down and join the conversation. You were like ready, and I was like, a gap in the conversation happened, and then
you were chatting with someone else about something else. I don't remember, but yeah, okay. I mean, sure. I don't think I had anything specific I wanted to say, but I wanted to meet you properly because I listen to your show and I'm a fan, and
thank you.
I like the work you do.
Well, so we'll do the setup, because whatever show title we use, people are going to know this. They're going to see Ethereum. They're going to see Ethereum and go, Pete, you got a Bitcoin show where you're discussing Ethereum.
Ethereum's going to be in the title one way or another.
Ethereum's going to be in the title one way or another.
Fair.
I have an evolving view of Ethereum, which I'm going to explain.
Yeah. Cool.
But the reason I wanted this conversation, one, you wanted to tell your story, and if somebody wants to tell their story, I always think it's important to listen if it's. I want it to be told if it's useful. But I am really into the idea of governance at the moment. It's something I'm really plugged into, both at a protocol level for Bitcoin, but also at a governance level for societies and states. And I think we're going to have a long conversation in this about Ethereum governance, and I think that's going to be a useful lens for considering why Bitcoin governance is what I would say is strong governance, or so a strong structure of governance.
Sure.
So that's why we're going to be talking about Ethereum. My position on Ethereum has changed. Like I'm a Bitcoin maxi. I only hold Bitcoin. I'm not going to buy Ethereum. But I at the same time, I'm tired of the war, because I think it doesn't achieve anything.
It's a war of attrition, isn't it?
It's a war of attrition. And look, I don't mind being critical of Ethereum for the things I understand. And if someone says, should they buy Ethereum? I'll usually say buy Bitcoin, and this is for this reason. But at the same time, like, it's not going away. People are using it. Yes, it might have issues long term and it might die. Fine. Technologies come and go. But I think it's really important to stop having useless fights that achieve nothing. So I
think this sounds a little bit cliche, but I genuinely think that, like, the things that unite us, which is to say the things we have in common, are much greater than the things that divide us. Like us being kind of like Bitcoiners and Ethereans.
Yeah, I mean, you're a Bitcoiner.
I am. I am. I think of myself as a Bitcoiner first and foremost. I'm happy to share more background, but when I first got into the space in 2016, 2017, the first thing I bought was Bitcoin. The first events I went to were Bitcoin meetups right here in New York, the BitDevs meetups. Shout out to those guys. Freaking fantastic. And if it came down to a situation where I was forced to choose allegiance, I would choose Bitcoin. I want to be very clear about that. But I also think it's possible to hold both of these kind of ideas in my mind at the same time, that both projects are cool and they both kind of solve different problems, basically.
And so I'm a Bitcoiner, I only hold Bitcoin. And I've just decided, like, that's my work. There's never going to be a scenario where I'm going to launch what Ethereum did. If I did, I would double my revenue overnight. And, like, there's massive financial incentives to do it. I'm just not going to do it. I don't have the time to dedicate to it, and I'm not hugely interested in it.
But you're curious and you're open-minded.
Well, no, it's not even curious and open-minded. I like you, and I want to talk to you. And what can I learn about Ethereum that helps me understand Bitcoin better is useful. But I'm not going to just just spend the rest of my life calling things shitcoins. And you know what? Sometimes I fear I've pushed people away from listening to my podcast when actually they could have come in and got something from
Yeah.
it just for being that. So I'm very supportive of what Udi's been saying recently. Me and Danny have been talking about it a lot. I think he's trying to make an interesting point that some people are missing. It's not about people being mean on Twitter. It's actually about a certain subgroup of people who are moronic assholes who get a thrill out of abusing people and being complete fucking shits. And I've got very low tolerance for that anymore. And that doesn't, when he frames that, I don't think he's saying every Bitcoiner's like that.
Of course not.
He's just saying there's this group of fucking idiots. And
but there's a group of fucking idiots in every sub-community.
Of course.
And social media gives them a microphone and amplifies their voice.
Yeah, and it rewards them.
We have this in Ethereum. I mean, I think, again, every community has some of these people.
But
you're right. The incentives are such that they get rewarded for acting that way.
Exactly. And I always think any form of like extreme behavior is a race to the bottom.
Sure.
And I think Udi's basically saying, look, there's nothing wrong with being a Bitcoin maxi, and Bitcoin is amazing, but surely we should not tolerate some of this utter bullshit that's got nothing to do with Bitcoin. So that's why I'm happy to have this conversation. And also, I've had I want other conversations now. I want to, So we should probably, people are thinking, what the fuck are you going on about? Why are you here today? And then we'll get into Ethereum.
It's a great question. Why am I here today? No, I mean, I think I have a story to tell that may be interesting and may be valuable to some of your listeners. I think that's kind of what it boils down to. I've had an interesting journey and an interesting set of experiences that I'm, more than happy to share with you. Also, I like you as well, and I like having conversations with interesting people and with interesting perspectives. So that's why I'm here.
So let's start with what Ethereum means to you. I'll tell you what it means to me. I genuinely think Bitcoin is my vault, my safe, my hard money, safe for the future, money for my kids, something I only dip in when I need, and it's my savings, and it's really hard to get. Like, that's it. I think of Ethereum as Vegas, but not entirely. But I think it's a place where I would maybe take money I didn't want to put in Bitcoin and go and gamble a bit and maybe make some more. And I know that might sound disingenuous because you're going to tell me about lots of other important projects. But outside of that, I do recognize that stablecoins exist on other blockchains and they're useful. And I know they exist in certain places on Bitcoin, but people are using them. I'm sure Bitcoiners use them. And I know there's a bunch of other projects, things that people are trying to build. And I've got to a place with Ethereum and Solana, anything like that. I think of that as fintech. And I think it's a different space. I think Bitcoin is trying to create best money for the world, subvert the state. These other protocols, they're basically fintech. The focus isn't decentralization, more permissionless. That's where I kind of think about it.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay. I think something that could help us frame the conversation is that, I think when I see Bitcoiners and Ethereans kind of talking at each other, we're just sort of coming from different places, which is to say we're looking at the world through different lenses. And I think that the lens that Bitcoiners tend to use, and this totally makes sense, is the lens of money, right? What is that phrase? Fix the money, fix the world. And I think that that's a really powerful lens. It's a great place to start. But I think that the lens so I have two lenses I use when I look at kind of Ethereum specifically, or kind of blockchain cryptocurrency more generally. And those are the lenses of innovation and institutions. Okay. So in a nutshell, to me, Ethereum is an operating system for building human institutions, better human institutions than the ones we have today, right? And this is something we have in common, is that we are extraordinarily skeptical of existing world institutions, whether they be governments, central banks, big companies, et cetera, for very good reasons. I mean, we were pre-pandemic. That's only been reinforced in to the nth degree in the past couple of years. And as a result of these different lenses, I think these two communities are optimizing for different things, right? So Bitcoin, again, like the sort of thing that Bitcoiners valued most, and you touched upon this a moment ago, is security, 100%, right? Like, yes, there's innovation in Bitcoin, absolutely. Yes, there's other things that Bitcoiners value, but if you were ever forced to make a choice between innovation and security, Bitcoin's going to go with security. And again, I think that that is of enormous value to the world. I think what the Ethereum community values more, so again, we also value security, right? That matters a lot in Ethereum, but innovation matters probably more than anything to us. Specifically, innovation along the lines of coordination. and human institutions are just tools for coordination. The person who I think has done the best work on this is Nick Szabo. Just like his work has been extraordinarily influential and inspirational to me in my journey.
Do we know what his position is on Ethereum?
I don't know.
Okay.
I know he's been in some sort of Twitter wars with Vlad Zamfir and some other folks regarding governance, which I think we'll get into because we're going to talk about governance. I mean, he's a Bitcoiner, I guess. So
yeah.
I'm not sure he likes Ethereum, but I don't want to put words in his mouth. I have no idea.
Okay.
Yeah. But so just to reemphasize, right? Ethereum is a operating system for building human institutions. What does that mean? It means that we have things like DAOs being the most obvious example. I mean, Bitcoin itself is a DAO, Ethereum itself is a DAO, and now we have all these really genuinely exciting, interesting, innovative DAOs being built at layer 2 on Ethereum that coordinate people around all sorts of crazy things. But again, what we're trying to do really is address these coordination problems, these sort of Moloch traps.
So can you give me an example of one of these? Because when I think of Ethereum projects, I think of something like, is Uniswap?
Uniswap started on Ethereum.
Started on Ethereum. Is it
that's like the first really successful decentralized exchange.
Yeah. So I think of Uniswap. I think of Cumrocket. I think of like stupid things. And
there's a lot of stupid things.
And I think of stable coins. What interesting stuff is not kind of come to the top?
Sure,
and what are we not seeing?
So I think I need to start with the big three. And I know you're familiar with all of these. So like anytime a Bitcoiner or anyone for that matter pushes back and says Ethereum is a shitcoin, there's no value. Well, I say, okay, we have DAOs, we have stablecoins, we have NFTs. I think that these are rock solid examples of things that create real value for millions of people around the world today.
Well, I'd agree on
we could dig into any or all of those, but
I'll agree on stablecoins. And NFTs is so interesting because that's even split some Bitcoiners.
Sure.
I've had a couple of interviews recently where Bitcoiners are like, I like NFTs. I'm not there with.
I'm not there with digital rocks.
Yeah, basically.
Nor am I there with CryptoKitties necessarily.
Yeah.
I think we need to look at short and long time frame, right? And I would say the same exact thing about ICOs and tokens circa 2017, right? Mm-hmm. Like 99% of the ICOs that happened, the tokens, I should say, created in 2017, lost 99% of their value. And that was right that happened. And here we are now, fast forward 3-4 years later, we have some really interesting use cases. Shapeshift decentralization project is a great example.
Yeah, I spoke to Eric about that.
Yep.
I was fascinated by that. And
that
also
probably could not happen without something like a token on something like Ethereum.
I also think the Blockstream BMN token, I can't remember the exact name, that's on Liquid, not because it's on Liquid, but I find that interesting because that is a token where you're getting rewarded in Bitcoin for the Bitcoin they mine. I think that's a super interesting.
It's like a mining future or something, some way to participate in, right?
Yeah, and it's a token, and I think that's also interesting.
Right. So again, this goes back to coordination challenges. And I'm agnostic to whether these things run on Liquid or on Ethereum or on Solana or any of these chains. But just circling back to NFTs, like we saw this Cambrian explosion of shitcoins in 2017. And as I said, most of them went away. But now here we are a few years later, and there are some, like, we understand best practices. I think as a community, we understand like how to get things like tokenomics right. And I think that we are now in that 2017 era with NFTs and a lot of, I don't know what the shitcoin equivalent, shitrock, NFTs.
Yeah.
Right. But fast forward a few years, and I think that there's some genuine innovation in there, and we will find it. And this sort of dominant design will emerge. And I think that will create a lot of value for a lot of artists.
Yeah. I mean, when I look at it all, I just think like there was a point my feed was just constant
Rocks.
NFT. Like everything, all kinds of, and it was a new series here, a new series there, all these new series.
It's still happening.
And I just think it's like oversupply of an idea.
But like so I agree. But the thing is, the market will sort that out.
Well, that's fine. But like the one I do actually look at every now and again, I actually think those crypto punks as art, they're kind of cool. They're kind of interesting.
They're on billboards here in New York and other cities as well.
I'm not going to buy one because it's too expensive. But when I look at it, as like most of this stuff, I just think is just mass-produced shit.
Sure.
But I think the punks are kind of cool. Now, I'm not going to buy one because I don't want to buy a hash. I think there's no value in it. I know other people do. The thing on NFTs I'm interested in is the idea of utility in NFTs.
Sure.
So this idea, I've talked about it a few times now. I'm very into the idea of an NFT for a ticket. So, for example, when we went to the Yankees yesterday, send me that as an NFT, and I want to sell it or I want to move it on. I can send it to you, and you've got it on your wallet, that just seems like a logical next step.
That's totally low-hanging fruit, obvious.
But I don't care what chain that's on.
Exactly.
Like that could be on Solana. I don't care as long as I get my ticket and I can
because you're not
in.
holding it long term.
Exactly. Right? So whereas some of the NFTs, you're like, well, if the chain dies in the long term, this is a problem because the NFT is suddenly lose its value. I know nothing really dies, but you know what I mean. But short-term tickets where it's just an actual utility, I think that's interesting.
I think it's very interesting. I think there's certain structural obstacles to get there. I think we will see this in our lifetime.
But the DAO, tell me about real-world DAO.
Can I just give you something to chew on before we switch topics? I think, and this is a bit of a big statement, and we could skip over this or we could double-click on it if it's interesting. I think that NFTs are to art as Bitcoin is to money. Right? What I mean by that is that a lot of people early on, and for that matter still today, look at Bitcoin and they're like, oh, this is just, what is it really? It's a cryptographic signature. It's a hash, right? There's no real value in this. I mean, you've spoken to contrarian, like sort of anti-Bitcoiners who have expressed this perspective. And I think that in the same way, like I'm not an artist. I don't get art necessarily. But like I'm beginning to understand that, yes, it is just a hash, but actually it is maybe the next evolution in art. And I think we should keep an open mind about that.
Yeah, I guess...
It's a new medium is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but I guess the difference being is like some Bitcoiners believe that Bitcoin will ultimately replace all money. I'm not there. I think it has a symbiotic relationship with sovereign currencies, but I can understand the world where they think it gets to, and who knows, maybe they're right. Unless we end up living in the Matrix, I think NFTs are just another medium. They don't replace.
But this is. I see what you're saying. They don't replace art.
Whereas the goal of Bitcoin for some Bitcoiners is to replace money.
If we are living in the metaverse in the future, they will replace art.
Possibly, yes.
But that's a separate question.
I don't think I'm going to get to live in that world.
I don't think I will either.
But like, I see it as like it's just an additional medium that some artists may or may not use. The change will be the day if Banksy ever does a NFT, a real one, not the fake one that happened recently. Like if someone like that.
I mean, Banksy is the type of artist who like will sell art on a street corner for $10 or something, or 10 quid, I guess, right? And to unsuspecting customers, like maybe there is already like real Banksy NFTs. Who knows?
Yeah, but we will see. I'm neutral on the future of them. I think there's some things that may come out of them that are interesting, but I'm more focused on money right now. So.
I think the likelihood that Bitcoin replaces all money is roughly equivalent to the likelihood that NFTs replace all art. I really think that there's an interesting parallel going on here.
Yeah, but I still think they're different goals. But we're going around there. Okay, the DAOs. Tell me about DAOs. Someone actually reached out to me recently and said, Pete, I want to launch a DAO to buy Liverpool Football Club. Would you get involved? I was like, no, because you're not going to buy them. And I don't have time for this nonsense.
I don't know, man. DAOs are raising crazy money. I was at a DAO-focused event the past few days, and there was a DAO that was created ad hoc, just kind of like a group of people having a conversation like this. And someone spun up a multi-sig and threw some ETH into it. And some of the people kind of aped in. That's like the new terminology, is you ape into things. And at the end of that day, there were more than $3 million in it. And it's still growing rapidly.
What is the DAO? And why
particular DAO? This particular DAO...
Oh, let's take a step back. For somebody listening...
Sure, yes. Let's rewind.
What is a DAO?
Okay. This is a really hard question to answer. So DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. There was an initial DAO so the idea emerged kind of around 2014, 2015. I think Dan Larimer was one of the first people who proposed this idea. In some early writings, there was some idea of a decentralized autonomous corporation, I think a DAC back around that time.
The king of blockchains.
Separate topic. But so the first DAO that I'm aware of was the DAO, very confusing, right? Which
the one that got hacked.
The one of 2016. Yeah. Well, whether it got hacked or not depends on your definition of hack.
Okay.
And I mean, this very quickly gets into.
Let's not cover that one. That's been done a million times.
It has, but it is both like the single most important event in the history of the Ethereum blockchain and community, right? So it's sort of like our, it's like the day that Ethereum lost its innocence, so to speak, right? So to understand anything about Ethereum today, you do really have to understand the DAO. And it's sort of become ancient history in crypto years because it was 5 years ago, but it wasn't really that long ago, and it was a very traumatic experience for people who lived through it. Anyway, I mean, a DAO at the end of the day is a coordination mechanism. It is, in very concrete terms, it's a smart contract on a platform like Ethereum, where people can contribute value in the form of ETH or stablecoins or other tokens or things. And usually there's some sort of a voting mechanism, right? So in the case of the DAO, it was sort of like a decentralized VC fund. Okay, so the idea was people throughout the ecosystem contributed ETH. At that time, it was really only ETH. And there were a small number of people known as curators. And the curators were responsible for spinning off these little investment vehicles, which were like subcontracts. And then those could be used to invest into investable projects at the time. And the idea was that those projects would pay dividends, returns back into the DAO fund, and everyone would kind of benefit from it. Okay, so I think what I'd like to say about DAOs...
Did the DAO launch at the launch of Ethereum, or
no. This was a year or two after Ethereum launched, but it was very early. Ethereum was a very immature platform, right? So I guess, to finish the DAO story, right? So what happened was the project was launched very quickly. It was not like really thoroughly audited. And in the defense of the folks behind it, it wasn't intended to get so big, right? It's exactly what I described a moment ago. It was like a group of friends who were like, hey, this is fucking cool. Let's like throw some ETH into this thing and like, let's see what happens. Let's see if the idea takes off. But the thing is, it's permissionless by design, right? I mean, that's how smart contracts work. And they didn't put in any caps or limits, right? And so a few days later, again, exactly the same phenomenon I just described that I just saw a couple of days ago at this event. There were hundreds of millions of dollars of ETH. And it was on the order of 10 or 20% of all the ETH in existence at that time.
Wow.
And so this is something else people don't understand, is that if the attacker had made off with all that ETH, that would have been pretty apocalyptic for the network, especially given the plans to transition to proof of stake and stuff, right? So this is one of the reasons that ultimately there was a decision to do a hard fork and return the funds. So yeah, I mean, this story has been told many times.
Quick version
of what happened after that?
No, of the hack.
Right. So there was a low-level exploit in the contract code. It was the first time it had ever been identified, and it had never been sort of exploited previously. There were some folks like Professor Amin Gunsir's team at Cornell, Phil Diane, a few other folks who actually had identified some of these vulnerabilities prior to the attack happening and had actually posted about them publicly on a blog called Hacking Distributed. So check out the articles there. They're really good explanations of the low-level details. Long story short, the attacker, for that matter, anyone, because again, this is permissionless, was able to craft a specific type of transaction to the contract that didn't immediately like drain the funds into that attacker's wallet. But what it did was it transferred the funds into one of these like subcontracts. And then there's like a cool-off period. I think it was about 30 days. And this attacker was able to keep sending these transactions and just keep withdrawing the same funds, or I should say, just keep withdrawing funds into this kind of subcontract over the span of a few days. And if no one had intervened, then what would have happened is, 30 days later or so, they would have been able to then subsequently withdraw all of those funds from that subcontract into wherever they wanted, into their own wallet, right? And what happened was people cottoned on to what was going on, and there was this really robust and this is genuinely, like, even Ethereum aside, this is like one of the most interesting stories of all time. Certainly one of the most interesting stories I've ever heard. Cami Russo does a really good job of talking about this in her book, which came out recently, also recommended if you want to understand the Ethereum backstory. But basically, yeah, there was a group of people around the world on multiple continents who kind of came together. They sort of dubbed themselves the White Hat Hacker Group, and they launched a counterattack. They found the exploit. They exploited it themselves. Because they had so many people submitting transactions, they were actually able to DOS the attacker so that their transactions ended up getting processed before the attackers did. And they were able to drain most of the funds using the same exploit into their own wallet, their own subcontract. And then they were able to return those funds to folks later. And then there was a hard fork, and that's...
So what was the size of the funds that the hacker had managed to drain?
I think they ended up with something on the order of like 20% of the DAO or something. So, like I said, the DAO, I mean, ETH was also, the price was changing at this time. It was some hundreds of millions of dollars. So the attacker probably had something on the order of like 30, 40, 50 million, something like that. But the White Hat hackers had the rest.
And this became a real point of contention because it was like, shall we hard fork, or is Coder's law?
Exactly. And actually, this is also a fascinating piece of lore. When the attacker started their attack, they posted a message. I think it was like encoded into the first transaction that they sent, something like that. So it's actually there on the blockchain. You can actually read it. You can decode it. And it says something to the effect of, thank you for creating this contract. Thank you for putting money in it. I'm going to use the feature that allows me to withdraw all the funds to my address. Have a nice day. Which is basically, I mean,
code is law.
I don't know where I put my hat. I'm wearing a hat that says, trust the code, it's fine. It's over there. But so, yeah, if you believe the code is law, then the attacker was not breaking any rules. And so again, this was the schism in governance in Ethereum that led to the hard fork that it's called an irregular state transition. So it violated the rules of the protocol, and the funds that the attacker had made off with, it transferred them back to the original owners or back to the DAO or something like that, right? And of course, what the network that became known as Ethereum Classic chose to keep mining on the original chain and not participate in that hard fork because they believe the code is law and it should be immutable.
So the hacker got to keep their funds on Ethereum Classic?
On Ethereum Classic, correct.
Do we know if they ever moved?
That's a good question. I mean, we could probably find out pretty easily.
It'd be interesting. Okay, so how much debate was there around having the fork? How contentious was it? I mean, obviously, if Ethereum Classic was created, there were obviously people who disagreed, but it's one of those ones where I kind of wrestled with it. I always try and think on both sides. And I think code is law. If you're going to build something immutable, great. But at the same time, somebody has stolen. This is essentially a theft. Depends how you describe it. It's an exploit. For example.
Well, so I mean, it's pretty clear. I'm agreeing with you. It's pretty clear that was not the intended use case of the contract, although that is the way the code worked.
Of course, yeah. I mean, but I don't want to have an exploit in the code in my bank and have my funds taken.
But this is the thing about governance, is that there has to be human interpretation, right?
Exactly. But ultimately, I think it was a bad decision. I ultimately think code is law. I do. But at the same time, seeing where Ethereum is now, and I consider it as fintech, it's not something I'd like to ever happen on Bitcoin. But why I consider Ethereum as fintech, I'm kind of perhaps that's a differentiator that Ethereum has, and actually is a separation from Bitcoin. But I think it's a really tricky one. Mainly, I think it's wrong because I think the people who made the decision were the people who lost their funds.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is either skin in the game or conflict of interest, depending on how you look at it. Just as a point of contrast, there was another event that happened in Ethereum in, I think it was late 2018, early 2019.
Was that something that got frozen?
Yeah. So this was a parity multi-sig wallet, right? And again, similar amount of money. It was at that time on the equivalent of $200 million US dollars, most of which belonged to the Web3 Foundation and a host of other projects that had raised ICOs and were storing their funds in this multi-sig contract. It didn't get stolen. It got frozen, right? Because of an exploit that someone, DevOps99 was their handle, sort of took advantage of. Whether intentionally or not, we don't know. And there was a lot of controversy at that time about whether or not we should do another hard fork and whether or not we should restore those funds.
And it got close.
I don't think it was ever close. It was definitely debated a lot, but it was pretty clear that, so again, this begins to get into Ethereum governance, that the people who make those decisions were pretty opposed to it, and it was not likely to happen. But, the consequence of that, was that a lot of the folks there, the Web3 Foundation folks, the parity folks, sort of mostly left the ecosystem, and now they have their own ecosystem, which is Polkadot. So you kind of have to consider, if the hard fork hadn't happened the first time around with the DAO, maybe those people would have gotten pissed off and left and done their own thing or something.
I mean, I assume Polkadot's another one of these protocols that are the other ones using and raised a lot of money and made people rich.
I don't have any opinion on it.
So many of them.
They did raise a lot of money.
There's so many of these things. How many people do you think what was the fewest number of people who were able to make that decision to fork Ethereum?
The original DAO?
Yeah.
So just to be clear, I wasn't around at the time.
Okay.
I joined the community.
What do you think? Is it something that it could be a couple of people can make that decision?
I think at that time, I mean, Vitalik's voice has always been influential. People have always looked up to him. Mm-hmm. There are a lot more decision makers in the community today than there were at that time. I don't know, but my guess is at that time, Vitalik weighing in support of a hard fork, seeing that may have been enough to tip the scale.
Okay.
A single person.
Okay.
Now, again, I think that may not be the case today, but it was the case at that time.
Okay, fine. It's a good setup. We should probably now talk about the Ethereum Foundation. What is it? Every time there seems to be a foundation created in any protocol, it seems to go wrong because a foundation implies some kind of centralization. The Bitcoin Foundation failed. There was an attempt at creating a similar one a couple of years ago. That got disbanded just because people disagreed with it. So explain who the Ethereum Foundation is, what it's designed to do.
I'll do my best. So by way of background, I first touched blockchain, Bitcoin, Ethereum, late 2016, and then getting into early 2017, I was sort of taking some time off work at that time. And so I was in an exploratory mode, learned about it, was fascinated by it, it hadn't clicked for me before because I had been a founder of a startup, and I think I'd just been very heads down mode up to that point. Sort of went down the rabbit hole very rapidly here in New York. I started attending meetups like BitDevs, which I mentioned, some kind of Ethereum events as well. And attended the Ethereum DevCon 3, which happened in November, I think, November 2017 in Cancun. And went down there as a volunteer. Literally know nothing. I mean, I walked into the room having no clue what a smart contract was, more or less. And because I was a volunteer, I was working alongside the organizers, which was the Ethereum Foundation, and got a chance to kind of be a fly on the wall for a lot of the research meetings that were happening there kind of prior to the conference. And was hired by the Ethereum Foundation shortly after that. So November, December 2017, worked as a contractor for the foundation. Basically everyone, aside from the directors, are contractors. That's just how the foundation works, for a couple of years, and then parted ways in 2019. There weren't really titles, but I was a core developer. I was working on a particular piece of the technology called EWASM, Ethereum Flavored WebAssembly, which was a plan to build a new smart contract virtual machine for ETH2. But also doing a lot of advocacy, a lot of traveling, a lot of education, a lot of hosting meetups, hiring, speaking at events, that kind of stuff, and governance. Ultimately, that's like I kind of, was hired sort of in this hybrid role as an MBA, as someone with kind of founder experience running startups, to act as an internal consultant, kind of interview all the individual teams and kind of figure out ways to introduce better like management practices at the foundation. And that's a whole separate story about what happened there.
Let me just try and understand the Ethereum Foundation, though. Is it essentially a governance, advocacy, and development nonprofit? It's
a nonprofit. So it is a Swiss Stiftung, to be specific, which is a foundation structure. It has some number of directors. I don't know if it has like an officially stated mission, but I mean, I guess it's sort of promote the health of the Ethereum network and ecosystem. And it was, so again, there's a little bit of backstory here, right? You have to understand how Ethereum was created. Again, Cami Russo tells this story really well in her book in more detail than I could in this conversation. The Infinite Machine is what that book is called. Yeah. But basically, there was dissension among the ranks, right? There was something like 10-ish people who had come together to build Ethereum, right? People including Gavin Wood and Joe Lubin and Vitalik and a few others. And long story short, there was a decision about whether Ethereum would be a for-profit company or a nonprofit. And Vitalik made the final decision. And
Ethereum would be.
Ethereum.
So it was
a group, it wasn't a legal entity. There was a group of people writing some code. And I think they got a sense that this had potential to be quite big, right? This is like 2015. And Joe Lubin, as the story is told, really wanted to create a for-profit company. Who else was involved? There were a couple of other folks involved.
So it would be a corporate block.
Charles Hoskinson was briefly the CEO of Ethereum.
Yeah.
Really interesting backstory there, right? But again, correct, right? The idea was, would it be a corporation? What would it be? Vitalik made the decision to make it a nonprofit.
I kind of feel like it probably should have been. Because if you think about it,
should have been a for-profit, you're saying?
I think it should have been. Because I think if it's not for-profit, it should strive for maximum decentralization. And I don't find Ethereum strives for maximum decentralization. I think it makes compromises on decentralization for throughput and the ability to build certain things. And by the way, you know how untechnical I am, but that's my kind of impression. But like if it was a company...
What do you think would be different if it was a company?
I think it would be a fintech, a permissionless fintech layer for people to build fintech technologies on. And I think it would have less of a war with Bitcoin because it wouldn't be about it being money. It would be about it. Because one of the things like I think is interesting in the world of fintech is this idea that I don't have to go and create logins everywhere. There's just, I can have a hardware wallet and I can move assets from one person to another. And that's down to the people building it to allow me to do that. And that kind of fintech layer, I think, is kind of interesting in some ways. So
it's interesting how we keep coming back to fintech because, yes, that is one of the things that you can do with Ethereum. Certainly, it's happening with DeFi. But I think what I'm suggesting is, to me, and I think to a lot of people who are very deep into it, it's a lot more than that, or at least it has potential, right? This goes back to that thing I said about operating system for building better human institutions.
Yeah, and I'm certainly going to trigger some people with these kind of ideas. And I guess if it was a company, then the DAOs would be less interesting because...
If it was a company, here's the thing. It would have shareholders, and it would have accountability to their shareholders. It would have a fiduciary duty. And again, this starts to get into governance. I think this is one of the issues with a foundation is that in any normal scenario, a foundation, in fact, again, I don't know what the rules in Switzerland are, but like here, for example, a foundation is required to raise a certain amount of its operating budget from donors every cycle, every year, whatever it is, right? And then by definition, it has accountability to those donors. And the thing about a foundation that was endowed with 3 million Ether, as I think the Ethereum Foundation was, right? That's a lot of money. It's billions of dollars today. Is that it doesn't have any accountability to anybody, period, full stop. But this is what it comes down to.
It kind of has shareholders. Because they're not shareholders like by the traditional term, but proxy shareholders in terms of the people who hold a lot of ETH, who have an interest in the direction of Ethereum, whether they bought them or they gained them as part of the pre-mine. So this whole war about pre-mines, I only think matters if you're trying to create the best money in the world. I don't think anyone else cares. Like Bitcoiners hate the pre-mine, but they're trying to compare two things that are slightly different.
Right.
I don't see it. I see Ethereum, even if it is decentralized and not a company, I still see it like a company. I consider the pre-mine as just the shares that the founders got.
Sure. I think that's a reasonable first approximation.
And therefore, it kind of has proxy shareholders.
Right. So, okay, a couple things to talk about here. The first is that, let me be very clear. The pre-mine ultimately was the biggest reason I left Ethereum.
Okay.
Period. There were other reasons involving Ethereum Foundation, governance. We could talk about those. But, look, I previously worked in traditional finance. I worked for a hedge fund a few blocks from here, and then in Hong Kong after that. And felt that like my role in the world, my role in human society was a cog in a machine that was making rich people richer. And that's an oversimplification, just to be clear. I mean, there are like pension funds and things, ordinary people's pensions that invest in things like hedge funds. Okay, so it's an oversimplification, but that's what I felt like after a few years of doing this. And, I started this job in 2006, was there through the financial crisis. I'm a very values-driven person, and I felt that I wasn't able to live up to those values in that role, okay? Fast forward a few years, went back to school, started a company, sold the company, got into Ethereum.
You're about to say the same thing happened again.
That's where I'm going with the story. It's fairly obvious, right? Yeah. But so, look, the first year in Ethereum, I said, I'm going to keep an open mind. I don't care what they pay me. I don't care if they pay me. I want to maximize learning. I want to travel. And thank you, Ethereum Foundation, for giving me the opportunity to do that. It was very eye-opening. But after a year, 18 months, I was like, holy shit, like, what am I really doing here? I'm really pumping Joe Lubin's bags. All due respect to Joe Lubin and all the other, Ethereum whales. It's just not what I want to do. And the reason for that was largely the pre-mine, right? Because at that moment, 70%, 70% of all the Ether in existence as of a couple of years ago had been distributed in the pre-mine. Today, it's about 60%. It's been diluted a little bit, right? So I don't know where you draw. I don't know what the right number is. I mean, we will never have another Bitcoin. We'll never have another immaculate conception. Again, I don't know if the right number is 10%, 15%, 20%. You could draw the line wherever you want. 70, 80, 70, 60 it's too much. It's just too much by almost an order of magnitude.
And who are the biggest holders within that? I know Vitalik, but I don't...
Vitalik's holdings are public, by the way. He's very transparent.
And I don't... The strange thing about Vitalik is I don't see him as financially driven.
He's not. Trust me, I know him. He's not.
Yeah, whereas Joe Lubin clearly is.
He's a businessman.
Yeah. So Vitalik, Joe Lubin, who are the other key... Charles Hoskinson, perhaps?
I mean, here's the thing. We other than the very small number of people like Vitalik who are public, also the Ethereum Foundation multi-sig wallet address is public. We don't know.
Okay.
We don't know. I can assume that the people who happen to be the crypto bros that happened to be in the room at that time and the very small number of investors who kind of got Ethereum circa 2015 did very well.
Okay.
Right.
All right. So you've joined the foundation.
But the point is, it's on the order of a few hundred people, maybe 1,000, maybe a couple thousand people, right? It's a very small number of people.
But within that, there's a few who have very significant interest.
Yeah, it's a very long tail. And, I've heard rumors, this is totally anecdotal, that like a very small number of individuals, like 1 or 2-ish people, single-handedly bought up like very large percentages of the pre-mine, basically the ICO, because they were able to participate pseudonymously. There were no limits.
Okay, so you joined the foundation
2017.
2017.
Right?
You are a Bitcoiner, but also interested in Ethereum, and you're not hugely financially driven, but you're interested in Ethereum as what it can be and what it can do. So
the social side.
Yeah.
So
you're
side.
joining the foundation to contribute to that. You feel like this is a good use of your time.
I felt like Ethereum was the most important project in the world at that moment. That's why I wanted to contribute to it.
Not because you want to create NFTs, because you think you can rebuild
human institutions, better institutions,
which we all know are broken right now. Interestingly, the long conversation I had yesterday with Rob Hamilton, the day before, was about how institutions have been broken by the broken monetary system, which was really interesting. But anyway, so we don't need to debate whether it can or can't. Some people say DAO's fucking stupid, some think, yeah, great. It doesn't even matter right now. That was what your goal was.
Correct.
Okay.
Also, just learning about, like, I'm a computer scientist, first and foremost. I'm a software developer. I'm also like an armchair economist. I've always been deeply fascinated by economics, by anthropology, by the study of human institutions, coordination, jurisprudence, law, things like that, right? And so Ethereum just tied together all these different threads for me, and money as well. I mean, I had background working in finance as well. So I was like, holy shit, this is like the 7 things I'm most passionate about. This project touches all of them.
Okay.
So it was just like head exploded, stare at the wall for 30 minutes to like let it all sink in. Okay, I want to work on this. And they gave me the opportunity to do that.
Great. So you joined in 17 and you leave in 19.
And I spent all of 2018 and the first part of 2019 just almost nonstop on the road, traveling conference to conference, meeting people, doing sprints with my team, like roughly 50% advocacy, social stuff, 50% technical stuff. And the advocacy included a lot of governance stuff.
So where did things go wrong? What was the point where you're like, I'm not sure what I'm doing here. I'm not sure what this is. Can you talk me through that?
Yeah, I don't think there was a particular moment. I think it was like my experience with the Ethereum Foundation was negative from the very beginning. And I can explain what that means.
Yep.
It's interesting because, as I touched upon earlier, like I still think very highly of Ethereum as a project, as a community, as a technology, as a platform. And I don't think very highly of the Ethereum Foundation, given my experiences there. And I think just it's important to emphasize that like these things can both be true, right? Okay. And so what kept me there was my love for the project and the people I met. What kept me there as long as I was there, but was my love for those things, in spite of the negative experiences I had with the foundation. So,
and did it get to the point where you were, because you can still do your work, your advocacy work, or did you get to the point where you felt you actually were ethically compromised in doing your work?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think probably there was an ethical conflict there because of what I said, because of the pre-mine. That's what I'm saying. That for me was sort of the final straw. Okay. There were a host of other things, but I was like, look, I can deal with these things. The Ethereum Foundation wasn't paying me well. They weren't treating me well. They weren't treating a lot of people well. There's a whole host of like internal management and governance issues. Maybe I could overlook all of that for the project and for my love of the project. So I guess maybe the answer to your question is when I became more active. Again, just to be clear, right? Started late 2017. I said, look, I'll give it 12 to 18 months. I'm just going to sit down, shut the fuck up, do the best work I can do, be the better person, and give this a chance to sort itself out. It didn't, right? So fast forward 12 to 18 months, my level of discomfort and that ethical, I'm remembering now, actually, I have almost PTSD over this because I had a lot of sleepless nights in early 2019. And I think that it was me wrestling with my conscience. And that's what led me, after those 18 months had passed, in early 2019 to become more activist, take a more activist role. And so one of the things I was trying to do was create a new foundation, right?
Okay.
Not replace the Ethereum Foundation, not destroy the Ethereum Foundation, but just create another pole of influence in the ecosystem. And there was a lot of support for this.
A completely separate foundation.
Completely separate foundation, because I felt that the Ethereum Foundation was irreparably broken.
You wrote something on your Medium about this, didn't you? About governance.
I wrote a lot about governance.
Yeah.
There was a tweet you may be referring to, which was I think it was April of 2019, where I tweeted that Ethereum governance has failed. And this was a tweet thread where I went on to explain, again, I had been very, very, very active in Ethereum governance.
Had you quit at that point?
No, this sort of precipitated that.
Is this your Jerry Maguire moment?
I think so. I mean, so let me.
I had one in advertising. So I just want to so I used to work in advertising and I loved it. And then by the time I hated it because I realized my job was to convince people to buy shit they didn't need.
Exactly.
And work weekends for people I didn't like, paying me to do a job that was just didn't advertising had lost its creativity.
Yeah.
I like old school advertising,
Mad Men style.
Mad Men style.
Who doesn't?
Yeah. where it's an art director and a copywriter working together to just create beautiful ideas.
Yeah.
And the industry got destroyed because there's too many channels. It just became bullshit. So I wrote this. I'll share it with you. I wrote this thing called online. Bear in mind, I had a digital advertising agency, and the piece was called "Online Advertising Does Not Work." And I wrote the whole thing. It's like why, where it's flawed, but how it can be better. And our website, we just made that our homepage, and I sent it out to all my clients.
Amazing.
And then I think I'd quit within 6 months after that.
Yeah,
it didn't do what I wanted it to do.
Right.
It didn't. I wanted it to be like Jerry Maguire's moment, which he wanted, where like everyone would turn around and go, "Yeah, this is great." Yeah, and then it's like, no.
Yeah. Very similar. So I actually wrote exactly that piece about Ethereum. I have that piece about the 10 ways I think Ethereum's broken. And how
I think I read it, but I think I read it in 19.
Yeah, this would have been 19. So there was this tweet thread. And I mean, it was just, I'm a very values-driven person. And I probably saw the writing on the wall and knew that this would be bad for me personally, for my career, for my, personal brand, whatever. I didn't give a fuck. Like, that's why you and I are having this conversation now, because again, I think that this is a story that needs to be told. I was helping run the main Ethereum governance mechanism, which is this thing called All Core Devs, this call that happens fortnightly with all the teams around the world that are developing, the core clients, was literally in the smoky back rooms at these events, sitting at the table with the decision makers. In fact, I have another. Yes, I think this is what you're referring to on Medium. There was a post called "How open is too open? How transparent is too transparent?" Something like that. We can find it and link it. Where actually, this is just for me from the beginning, Ethereum was always about creating value for the world, for everyday people, right? And again, about dismantling these shitty institutions and existing hierarchies and power structures we have in the world. And to find myself in these rooms around these tables with a bunch of wealthy white dudes from primarily Europe and North America, making decisions about a network worth billions of dollars, paternalistically.
Changing the monetary policy?
The monetary policy, we can talk about that, how that happened, right? It made me very uncomfortable. And I wanted to share that message with the world. I wanted to share this experience. And people really didn't like that. It made them very uncomfortable.
So, God, there's so many things to talk about.
I know, right?
Right, let's start with the response to the tweet thread. Just give me the short version. I think I need that to know that now.
Yeah.
I'm going to imagine some support, some hate.
Some small degree of support from really close friends. Yeah. And that's kind of what got me through it. Like people reaching out privately, right? In DMs saying, "I totally agree."
It's always privately.
Always DMs, right? A lot of hate. And it's funny, when you and I first discussed having this conversation, doing this episode, you said, "Be prepared for backlash." And I was like, dude, maybe it'll happen, but it can't possibly be worse than what I experienced in 2019. It was bad. It was really, I'd never experienced anything like it up to that point in my life. There are long threads on Reddit of people calling me an evil, baby eating monster. And even people that I considered friends kind of suddenly deciding that I had become evil and been corrupted by the Bitcoiners or something, that I was a Trojan horse sent in to destroy Ethereum. Conspiracy theories. It was wild. Meditation got me through it, honestly.
Do you think it's because there's people who genuinely disagree with you? And do you think it's also because people felt their bags got threatened? I think it's
the latter, right? I think it's this autoimmune response, right? It's tribalism is really what it comes down to. If people disagree, and there are people who disagree and who did engage with me constructively and said, "Hey, Lane, you have these ideas about a new foundation, about a better way to fund the public good, right? Than we're able to achieve right now. Let's talk about that. Let's poke holes in this." But I mean, it was mostly just vitriol.
Right. Okay.
This is the problem with social media.
Okay.
I had great conversations in person at events with people, right? But
that's always the way. I of all the dicks I've dealt with on Twitter, only one's done it in public, in person, and I was like, "Well, what are you fucking doing? Let's have a beer and let's talk this through."
99% of the time that works.
but he was like, "No," and he was completely lost his shit with me in public. I was like, "Okay, well, I'm just
incidentally
gonna leave."
There's another thread here. This is actually, I think, the biggest issue with virtual governance, things like DAOs and like cloud states. Balaji speaks a lot about this
Yep.
vision of like a network state or a cloud state. I learned about another project 2 days ago that's working on this, which is very exciting. I don't think you can govern something strictly like pseudonymously online, like people just revert to being trolls. I think you need to put flesh, human beings in meat space in the same room together over beers or whatever,
There's so many things in life. Danny, imagine we were doing this interview over, if we did this online over Zoom, it's an entirely different interview. It had to be in person.
I agree.
You told, like, there's certain interviews have to be in person. Okay, forget COVID. There was a period of time where I would travel to interviews, not travel to interviews, but certain ones had to be in person. When I interviewed Hester Peirce, I knew I had to go to the SEC.
Well, not to mention our friend Bukele.
President Bukele, I had to do that one. Well, both of those in person.
Yeah.
There's certain ones you have to do in person. This had to be in person.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to say, as a avid listener of the show, there's a difference. I can tell as a consumer.
Me, as the guy doing it,
Yeah.
there was a period of time when I was doing them online during COVID.
Yeah.
It stopped being something I enjoyed doing. It became a job.
Yeah.
Right. What's one's today? What's one's tomorrow? Right. Here's my notes. Do it. I'll be there an hour yet. Nearly. It's just shit. These ones, I just love them. It's a different experience.
And listen, kudos to you for doing the backbreaking work of pounding the pavement and going around and doing this in person. Like, as someone who did this myself for a couple of years in Ethereum, I flew hundreds of thousands of miles. Like, I know how difficult it is to like live out of hotel rooms and stuff. So it's appreciated. It's important work.
It's worked out okay. It's a good life. Like, I could complain about it, but I've been very,
do it while you
very
can, because I feel like it doesn't get any easier as we get older.
Well, like we've said, we're going to try and get a studio in Austin next March for a whole month before Bitcoin 2022.
Amazing.
And we're going to fly people in and have one base.
Rogan style, yes.
Yeah, Rogan style, but just so I can get all the right people in.
Yeah.
Like it's almost as central as I can get Texas in some way. I can get the California people in, I can get the New York people in, I can get the Texas people in. And we're going to try that for a month. Jeremy here is going to come and help us with the camera work.
Amazing.
Hopefully Emma will be here as well, helping with everything. And that gives us a chance to just try and have a base. I don't think we'll ever have a permanent base, but we can do 2 months of shows. And every single in-person conversation is going to be better.
Yeah.
Because it's real.
Yeah.
You get emotion. You get the peripheral vision. You get to relax in a chair.
Dude, we all love technology.
Yeah.
Like, we all live largely virtual lives. We all went into the pandemic thinking this is, obviously it sucks, but like, let's make the most of it. I got my first VR headset,
Mm-hmm.
I'm so tired of it. I'm so done. Like, maybe this is just a generational thing. Like, maybe, our kids' generation or something, like they will really live in the metaverse. But I'm very old fashioned.
But it had to be in person, and I'm glad it is.
Yeah.
So I think the best question to ask is, how did Ethereum governance fail? Like, why did it fail?
Yeah, it's a great question. Again, there's a lot of pieces here to look at, but so let's set aside the Ethereum Foundation for a moment and talk about kind of Ethereum, like the protocol, the technology, right?
And then perhaps tell us how you think it should have worked. I'd rather hear how it should work and then hear how it failed rather than the other way.
You think so? Starting with how it should work, and
I want to start with the purity of you've arrived at then.
I can try.
Yeah.
So I think so. Actually, this is interesting because it touches upon a difference, maybe the core difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Bitcoin has, I don't sort of know that much about how Bitcoin arrived in this place, because it was already in this place in 2017 when I really got into the ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is a place of kind of like, it's not no governance, but it's like minimal governance, right? Like, when shit hits the fan in Bitcoin, when a bug is discovered or something, like, there's definitely enough kind of coordination mechanisms in place that those things are addressed quickly. The message gets out, miners upgrade, et cetera, right? So you can't say there's no Bitcoin governance, but
that's important. You need that,
right? And that's sort of meat space social governance, right?
Yeah, and it's like disaster scenarios,
right? Exactly, but not only, right? I mean, Taproot is really interesting, right? There's a governance mechanism by which that and Schnorr signatures and all these kind of, like, there are technical upgrades happening to Bitcoin, right? But it is by design very slow, like kind of snail's pace.
Hard to change.
Exactly, by design. Ethereum kind of has the worst of both worlds, okay? So it's kind of like in between, right? And so let me try to explain. So you have the spectrum, right? So on the one hand, you have kind of like absolute minimal governance, which is Bitcoin. At the opposite end of the spectrum, you have like formalized governance structures. You have something that resembles the governance of this country or some other like nation state or something, right? You have like You have voting, you have democracy, you have a notion of identity, you have like participatory institutions, ideally less extractive and more kind of participatory, inclusive institutions, which are not doing so amazing right now, but at least, it's better than the alternative. You have like legislative assemblies, you have courts, et cetera. You have kind of all this like rigid, like formal governance. Ethereum is kind of right in the middle. And it is very, very, very much a case of this thing called the tyranny of structurelessness. Tyranny of structurelessness refers to an essay written by someone named Joe Freeman in the 70s. It came out of like a women's rights feminism movement. It's short. It's when I encountered this and read it, like it sent chills down my spine because it spoke so directly to what I was experiencing in Ethereum, right? And so what tyranny of structurelessness refers to is the fact that human society, human institutions and organizations always have hierarchy, always. It cannot be avoided, right? Anytime you have more than kind of 2 or 3 people sitting in a room together, fighting over scarce resources, figuring out how to allocate time, making some decision, some hierarchy just emerges, right? And so you can kind of either choose to formalize that hierarchy into institutions and roles and, democracy and things like that, or you can just let this structureless kind of tyranny emerge, right? And so this is kind of like what's happened in Ethereum. It's what happens in a lot of these institutions and organizations that kind of sweep governance under the rug and, kind of like stick their fingers in their ears and say like, we don't need governance. We're, better than that. We're smarter than that. We don't like politics, right? This is the thing is people...
It sounds like an argument against anarcho-capitalism.
I have to ask your friend Michael Malice for his opinion on this.
So this is one of the things whereby I get into some discussions. I get called a cuck and a statist because statist cuck, and it's not because I love government. Right. I think it's great. I just believe that we as humans naturally organize ourselves, and humans can be greedy and evil, and therefore we're better off having democracy and institutions that are responsible for us rather than having just like an open structure. But I'm open to the debate and happy to listen to both sides. I'm just on the side, I prefer the idea of small government if we could do it.
No, I
need to read this.
I have very similar political sensibilities to you. It's another reason I was excited to have this conversation. And I had exactly those thoughts as I was just listening to that conversation that you had with Michael. Look, at the end of the day, like these structures are designed to enfranchise and protect the needs of the minority. Like, I shouldn't say the minority, I should say you're going to have this elite group that emerges in any of these kind of chaotic scenarios. And again, I have firsthand experience with this in Ethereum. I'm sure it's happened and is happening all over the world in many situations. And the elites are going to do quite well for themselves, right? But then you're going to have this large group of people who, for one reason or another, maybe in the case of a project like Ethereum, they're just like latecomers to the project, right? The peasants, exactly. The proletariat, like the elite structures have already ossified, they've already emerged, right, at that point in time, like when I joined the project, for example. And so like there was a very clear class difference 2017, 2018, when I was in the project between pre-sale people, pre-sale people, and post-pre-sale people, because Ethereum had, 100x, 1000x, whatever by then, right? So like there was this very small group of people who all knew each other, all trusted each other, had these working relationships, were making the decisions. And on top of that, they were post-economic, right? They kind of had this like economic security, so they don't like care if they're getting paid. And then there was kind of the rest of us who have like, bills to pay and like realities and have to keep our feet on the ground. And so this is like the kind of issues I think that are not well addressed by tyranny of structurelessness. So I think to answer your question, circling back, I think the Ethereum kind of has the worst of both worlds, being kind of in the middle. I think that if Ethereum, on the one hand, were to say, we don't want a foundation, we don't want governance, we want to stop evolving the protocol, then Ethereum could go in the Bitcoin direction. And maybe it's too late for that, right? And maybe that's not right.
But the Bitcoin protocol does evolve.
It does. But as I said, but kind of much more slowly, and it optimizes for security. Ethereum is optimizing for innovation. Two different things. And I think
Bitcoin's doing two things. It's optimizing for security. I agree with that. I also think it's optimizing for the best money ever.
Sure.
I don't know what the
monetary policy of Ethereum. Nobody knows.
But the monetary policy of Bitcoin just doesn't change.
Right.
And there are people who work on Bitcoin who are core contributors, or the people what if the people have access to the GitHub, like the
commit access,
commit access.
Core developers, basically.
Core developers, the handful who maybe have that. They may be big Bitcoin holders, I don't know, but I never feel like decisions are being made to make Bitcoin worth more money, Bitcoin worth more. I think what they're doing is trying to build the best money that ever existed and not fuck up.
Don't you think that has largely been accomplished? Hasn't Bitcoin kind of won that already?
Yeah, but I think there's more stuff to do. I think there's more on the
always more to do.
There's more on the privacy side, and there's more just the most interesting stuff's at the higher layers now. Anyway,
for sure.
What I'm saying is, I 100% trust and believe in the people who have commit access and the core contributors. It is the mission. I think for you on Ethereum, it was the mission.
But here's the thing as well. Ethereum's a big tent, okay? Whereas Bitcoin has this kind of toxic maximalism culture and this kind of like autoimmune response, which we talked about before. Ethereum is kind of the opposite. Ethereum is kind of like welcomes you with open arms and unicorns and rainbows and avocado toast and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But the downside of that is that Ethereum does not have a mission. It doesn't. Like, you will ask 10 Ethereans, 10 core contributors, you'll get 10 different answers. And this, I think, just to complete the thought I was saying before, Ethereum has the sort of worst of both worlds. I think the answer to your question is, I think Ethereum cannot and will not go the Bitcoin direction. So I think that what Ethereum should do is go in the other direction, and it should have a constitution. Like, I think a constitution might be, like, Bitcoiners would laugh at this idea. I don't think it's appropriate for Bitcoin, but it could be appropriate for Ethereum, right? And then once you have this core statement of shared values, shared principles, this ethos in writing, sure, not everyone's going to agree with it.
How the fuck do you ever get that? There'll be arguments over every word.
We tried. We had a conference in 2018 when we tried to do this, and we failed.
What do you think Ethereum is trying to be? Like, I say Bitcoin is trying to be the best money that exists.
Right. And that's very clear. And people agree about that.
And
that's kind of like what defines you as a Bitcoiner is like, do you agree or disagree with the statement?
And therefore, everything they do, whether it's layer 2 technology, whether it's Taproot, anything, it's like, does this make Bitcoin better money? And I believe every time it does. For you, forget everyone else, what do you think Ethereum's snappy message should be, mission?
It should be what I said before. It should be, and I've had a lot of practice and a lot of time to think about this, it should be to be the best operating system for building better human institutions, period, full stop, right? But not everyone agrees with that. We have other narratives, right? It's all down to the narrative. Seeing how the Ethereum narrative has like evolved since the beginning is fucking mind-blowing. You go back to the very early days, like 2014, 2015 days, you see Gavin Wood talking about his vision for Web3, having primitives, not just compute, but also things like messaging and storage. Those never really emerged. The decentralized global computer, the ETH is money meme. I mean, that's like a big one. That now the new ultrasound money, kind of narrative. There isn't a single narrative. That's kind of
the ultrasound money is just so fucking dumb.
I was assuming we'd touch upon this.
Well, because look, we're going all over the place. Like, world computer, I kind of got it.
Sure.
And I still think in some ways it kind of is.
It's a very slow, very expensive computer, but it is kind of a decentralized world computer.
Yeah.
That was actually the narrative that hooked me.
I mean, ETH is money to find money. Like, I mean, I had the conversation with Peter Schiff recently. I said, in prison, cigarettes are money. Like,
and he said, yeah, because you could smoke them.
Well, yeah. But it's funny you did say that. So I'm like, whatever, ETH is money. But this ultrasound money, I think, is so hugely disingenuous.
I haven't made up my mind about it. So just for sake of argument, can we touch upon both sides? So I think that people who kind of scoff at this meme, most Bitcoiners, will do so because Ethereum's monetary policy is loose and has changed many times. And we should talk about that as well, because I was part of those decisions. And how can money be sound if, the small number, if a cabal, so to speak, kind of like can change it at will? I don't think it's exactly that simple, but right, on the one hand. On the other hand, Ethereum has begun to reduce its issuance, and issuance will continue to reduce and in fact reach a point where it's net deflationary, right? So more coins are being burnt than are being created. So if your definition of sound money is that it's, is that the issuance is predictable and well known, like I think is at Bitcoin, that it's sort of Bitcoin is like slowly approaching deflationary, or that it's, basically that issuance is deflationary, then Ethereum kind of is sound money, right? If you believe that.
But what if it changes again? How many times is the main? Is it like, I could think of at least 3,
4-ish. Yeah. But now it's more complicated because there's 2 Ethereums, right? There's ETH and there's ETH2.
Okay, we've got so much to get into. Right, let's take it back a step.
Yeah.
Let's take it back, because we're going on tangents here. Okay, why did it fail?
Why did Ethereum governance fail? Yeah, let's go into
basically, that. Basically, I want the juice of this. What was going wrong? What was the stuff you're like, this is fucked up?
Yeah, let me explain what I meant by that. So the sort of things that need to be decided as part of Ethereum governance, like, yes, there's technical things for sure. There's questions about the protocol. There's low-level questions. Those things, I think Ethereum's done a good job of. However, increasingly, as the kind of stakes grow, right, as more things, more institutions, financial tools, primitives, art, whatever, are built on Ethereum, there are increasingly non-technical things that need to be decided, right? So these are things involving ethics. These are things involving economics. And the most obvious example here is economics. That's not a technical question. It's an economic question.
Okay.
Right?
Economics, monetary policy.
Monetary policy is one of them. It's not the only thing.
What do you mean about, you said ethics?
Ethical questions. So that's, for example, funds recovery.
Okay.
Right. So this was around that time. I said that was late 2018, early 2019. Right. So this was also one of the things that led me to say that. That was probably the hottest issue at that time. And here's another one: mining. Okay. So at that time, there was a proposal to switch from ETH-hash, which is the hash function that's used for Ethereum mining, to a new function called ProgPoW, programmatic proof of work, in order to make Ethereum more ASIC resistant, okay? And there was a particular line in the Ethereum white paper. The Ethereum white paper is not like the Bitcoin white paper, okay? Bitcoin white paper is like a fixed thing, right? 7 pages.
Is it 7? I thought it was 9.
Maybe it's 9.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm
Pretty...
showing off my ignorance here.
Well, my brother's just getting into Bitcoin, right? And works very closely with me. And he said, he keeps coming back, he keeps saying, I cannot believe there is a money that might become the base money for the world, and it's defined in 9 pages.
It's fucking mind-blowing, like genuinely.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a foundational document for, this quickly gets into like religion and how religion is presented, but let's table that. Yeah. You've had that conversation. I have too. The Ethereum white paper is a markdown document. Actually, this is amazing. I've never thought about it in these terms before, but this is the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum in a nutshell, right? The Bitcoin white paper itself is immutable, like the Genesis block. The Ethereum white paper is a markdown document on a wiki on GitHub.
So it can change.
So it can change. It has changed. You can see the edit history, right? And there was a line, which I think was actually removed, right? That referred to Ethereum being sort of mineable on GPUs. The idea here being that anyone who owns a GPU can participate in mining at home. That was the original idea, and it was true in the beginning. And ASIC resistant, okay? And so then this whole debate arose in late 2018, early 2019, and to some extent is still going on, about whether or not basically evidence emerged at that time that there were Ethereum ASICs for the first time, okay? Rumors, and I think we know now they exist. So there's a technical piece to this question, but really what it comes down to is economics and ethics. You had asked, like, what do I mean by ethics? Ethical questions. Well, the question is, like, who deserves to earn the mining rewards? Is it large Chinese mining firms who have access to this hardware? Is it people mining from home? Is it, existing miners with GPU farms, things like that, right? And the point is, Ethereum is kind of a technocracy, right? In the sense that there's a relatively small group of technical core contributors, core developers, who get on this call. I described the fortnightly call. It's called the All Core Devs call, and sort of make these decisions in a fashion called rough consensus. So this is another topic which is very interesting. But long story short, there's 2 issues with this. The first is that technical contributors, first of all, don't have the expertise to weigh in on these things. We don't have training in economics, and we're making monetary policy decisions. We don't have training in conflict resolution and ethics and philosophy in sort of these questions, right? That's the first issue. And the second issue is that a lot of the technical core contributors are very sort of reluctant to weigh in on these things, maybe because they don't feel they have the expertise, but also because it opens them up to potential liability, right? Hypothetically, if this group were to make a decision to change the mining algorithm, you could have existing miners come after you and sue you. There are like legal scholars who have suggested that maybe the core developers have some sort of fiduciary responsibility. Actually, this gets back to what you were saying before about all holders of Ether are by some interpretation kind of like stakeholders in the network. And there's just no body of law around this right now.
How many people on the call? What's the number of these people?
So all of my information is a bit out of date, right? Because I stopped contributing a couple of years ago. But yeah, I mean, it would range anywhere between 7-8 people up to kind of 30-ish people.
And how do you get elected to be one of those
you
people?
Don't. There's no elections. This is tyranny of structuralistness.
But what stops me randomly joining the call?
We have had people randomly join the call. Pretty funny episodes, actually. Well, I mean, the short answer is you wouldn't know where to find the link.
Okay.
It's sort of quasi-public. It is in a public channel if you know where to look for it. Again, it's a gray area. It's very much a gray area. But basically, if you have commit access, right? If you are a core developer to commit access to one of the Ethereum full node implementations. But again, asterisk, this is also not super well defined because there's a lot of them that are not like mainnet viable, right? That are not sort of mature or feature complete, et cetera. And some of those developers join the calls as well. But basically, if you're kind of known socially to be a constructive contributor technically to the project, right? And again, this is on the order of like maybe 50 people total. They're not all always on the calls.
And correct me if I'm wrong. The way this is solved in Bitcoin is everything is done through a BIP.
Everything in Ethereum is done through an EIP.
But it feels like to me everything's done through an EIP, but there are board meetings. These sound like board meetings.
Sort of, yes.
I don't believe...
Are there not? I guess there are not
I
meetings.
don't believe there's a... No.
For Bitcoin, I mean.
I mean, I wouldn't know. You know, I should probably get someone like... I mean, I don't know who works on it. Does Jonas Chanelli? Is that his name? Maybe he gets involved, or Brian, or... I should speak to somebody who's...
Matt Corallo, one of these guys.
Yeah, who's a Bitcoin core developer, and
exactly.
I should learn exactly how that works. So
my understanding is that there's BIPs, of course. Yeah. There's the main coordination mechanism for Bitcoin is the Bitcoin Dev mailing list.
Yes.
It's kind of a very old school, old fashioned way of doing things. It's how like Linux got built and still gets built, right? Yeah, for no question.
Like
Ethereum, it's more like a board meeting.
So who sets? So someone must control the link that goes out.
Yeah. So that's what I was doing.
Okay. And so that is a decision that comes from the Ethereum Foundation that someone has but the Ethereum, it's under the governance of the Ethereum Foundation to run this meeting.
Kind of. It's very messy. It's very gray area. Okay. So there have been a lineage of people who have done this. Hudson Jameson. I don't know if you've ever crossed paths with Hudson.
I have actually.
Good guy.
I sent him a private message once to see how he is.
Good guy. Yeah.
I'd like to meet him.
Yeah, I'd love to arrange that, actually. That'd be a lot of fun. He may be in town this week. We can make that happen. Genuinely, good guy.
I just want to know if he's okay.
Yeah, I think he's okay. I hope he's okay. So he sort of single-handedly ran this process. I think he was the second person ever to do this. So let me think. I got involved in 2017. Hudson probably started doing this around 2016. I sort of started helping Hudson out because he was doing this by himself. And by the way, I think this is a position of enormous responsibility, enormous stress. You're sort of the face of the company, not the company, sorry, why am I saying company? The face of the project and the governance of the project to the world, so to speak, like on channels like Twitter and Medium. Like Hudson was the person who was responsible for announcing when there had been like bugs discovered, that kind of thing, right? And so he was on the front lines, so to speak. And so I was kind of backing him up a little bit in that role, and I helped him run a number of these calls.
Do you think this led to what we were just nodding at each other about?
I think it was probably a factor. I mean, that's a huge burden for anybody to deal with. Yeah.
So how is the agenda set for these calls? Does everyone bring their own item?
So the coordinator, which is Hudson, and this is also partially what I did, opens an issue it's basically done on GitHub, right? Opens an issue on GitHub a few days or a week or two before the next call and puts out a draft agenda. And then other folks, members of all core devs, are invited to come in and propose additions or modifications to the agenda. But really, at the end of the day, it is that one person's responsibility to act as coordinator or moderator and set the agenda for the calls. Right. Now, this is a position of enormous power and responsibility, because if something doesn't make it onto the agenda, then it's not going to be accepted as an EIP, and it's not ultimately going to make it into the protocol. So it is a very important seat to be in. And
these are all Ethereum core contributors?
Yes, for Ethereum 1. Now, again, there's now an Ethereum 2, and that has a different mechanism. So
okay, we'll come to that.
But basically, yes, Ethereum, all sort of production Ethereum today, yes.
Does Vitalik join those calls?
From time to time, but when I was doing this, and I think up to and including the present, very rarely. Like, he'll come and kind of join and weigh in on specific things, but he's been much more hands-on with ETH 2 than with ETH 1.
Let me give you a real-world comparison of this, what you've explained to me, and you can correct me if my comparison's bad. And this is where I see flaws. I used to run, we talked about my digital advertising agency. I say digital agency. We built websites, we did social media campaigns, we did search engine optimization, we did email marketing, everything a digital web agency did. Our company has no business without developers. We had probably 15 developers, some PHP, some .NET.
Sure.
And then we have layers of project managers, user experience designers, account handlers, etc. I'm the CEO. I have a business partner. I operate sales and planning.
Yep.
My business partner, Ollie, did the operations. We had a board with another guy, Tim on it, and we moved, I think, Debbie and Vic into the team. A comparison would be that company, the board meetings that we used to have every 2 weeks would be run by the devs.
And only the devs.
And only the devs, with anyone choosing to turn up if they want to. They didn't have to, but some did, some didn't.
And there's no formal quorum, by the way.
Yeah.
So I could give you at least 1 or 2 examples of calls where significant decisions were made with only 5 or 6 people on the call.
Yeah, and they making decisions in terms of what's the pay structure?
Right, exactly.
Well,
are we going to issue stocks? How many stocks are we going to issue?
Yeah.
Who's going to get them? Things like that, right?
And the interesting thing is, like, these developers are some of the smartest people I've ever met.
Definitely.
They absolutely crushed it for me for years. I love them all. We built a great company. But they didn't have the skills to run a company. They had the skills to develop. I don't have skills to develop. I had the skills to run a company. Everyone knew what they were good at, what they want. And we had a structure because a structure works. Ultimate decision maker. But I would always run everything by my business partner. But like, if we didn't agree, I was ultimate decision.
Right.
Below that, we had a board where we tried to decide things together. And then people manage their clients and projects. The structure worked because we had structure.
And even more to the point,
experience.
You had accountability.
Accountability.
Which is to say that if you fucked up, your ass was on the line and your board could fire you. I mean, that's the way companies work, and there's a reason for that.
They couldn't fire me.
You get what I'm saying. The point is, there is formal accountability structures in place.
We're a small private company of 40 people. What you're referring to, a public company, yes, you can be fired.
Right.
I'm pretty sure if there is a scenario where perhaps Michael Saylor could get fired for MicroStrategy. Maybe I'm wrong.
It's a publicly traded company. I mean, I'm sure that's the case.
Steve Jobs got fired by Apple. Like, this shit happens. And but I had accountability to my business partners and investors.
Accountability is like the least sexy thing in the world. It's the most boring thing. You know, I went to business school. I had a class in corporate governance. It didn't interest me in the least. And I didn't at all appreciate or understand how important it was until I got into Ethereum and saw what happens when you don't have accountability structures in place.
Humans build structures that work. Not always, but generally speaking.
Sure.
Okay, so this already sounds to me like a complete shit show. It just does. It just sounds like me as somebody who's run companies, I can look at that and go, that's not going to work. If you're making those decisions, that's not going to work. And that's why when you said earlier about whether Joe Lubin created this as a company, well, if he did, those decisions wouldn't be made by those people in those rooms. There would be a different structure.
Well, I think there'd be more structure. I think the people making the decisions would be qualified to make the decisions. Yeah. I think they'd have their legal liability covered by a company, which is, again, is a big issue in Ethereum. And I think there'd be accountability.
So this is just, to me, this is just a failure of structure. Okay, therefore the foundation, I understand why you say it's failed. One thing I'm quite interested in knowing about, the area I'm always interested in is the monetary policy.
Yeah, let's talk about that. It's interesting.
But the reason I'm interested in the monetary policy is, one, I wouldn't want something where the monetary policy keeps changing. But look, I'm also maybe just got rose-tinted glasses because Bitcoin's never changed. Then that's perfect. You should never have a change in monetary policy. And, we're all against central banks who do have a change in monetary policy. It is decided by 5 old or 10 old white guys in a room who may be also changing the monetary policy for things that affects their own pockets. I think we had the other day, it was revealed that the Fed were buying things that Jerome Powell owned. So
surprise.
Yeah, surprise, blah, yada, yada. But the monetary policy, the reason that interests me most, I want to know if there are monetary policy decisions that are made which will lead to the value of Ethereum going up directly. And if there are people who are large Ethereum holders, got to influence those decisions, and whether they're making those decisions for themselves rather than Ethereum. For number go up rather than what Ethereum needs. I'm leading you down to a certain place,
sure.
But I want to know if that kind of shit happens.
Yeah, look, I think I touched upon this earlier. There's 2 ways to look at this, right? The positive way is to say that and actually, we talked about this in Ethereum. Should core developers, should people participating in all core devs, be paid ETH and have a publicly known something, wallet address, something, right? In other words, should there be skin in the game, right? That's the positive side. We shouldn't be making these decisions arbitrarily. What I'm saying is we should be facing the downside consequences as well as the upside, right? Mm-hmm. We should know that if we fuck up, this is sort of a form of accountability, our own kind of bags are on the line. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that there's a massive conflict of interest, which I understand is kind of what you're getting at. and actually, this was one of my issues in Ethereum, was that there was no disclosure of conflicts of interest, and they're rife. I mean, they're everywhere in the space in the Ethereum Foundation, among the core developers, et cetera. A couple people did. I think actually Vitalik was one of them. He kind of went out and said, "Look, this is my public Ethereum wallet address. These are the other I'm an advisor for these projects. I hold these coins, these tokens, et cetera." Like, I think that, again, this is a thing. This is a normal thing in real world governance, right? Like, we should, and we were obviously not doing as good a job as we could be in the United States government, for example. But basically, conflict of interest disclosure is like a standard thing. Like, that's just a starting point. We should have that. Now, to your question, what I can tell you is the process by which these changes are made, and kind of who participates in them. I can't tell you how much ETH they hold, right? I don't know that. So Ethereum monetary policy, like, I believe originally it was like 5 ETH per block.
Yeah.
Something like that. And the network launched in 2015. And you could, do the math back of the envelope, but there's some thousands of blocks per day as opposed to Bitcoin, where there's like 188 blocks per day, whatever the number is, because the Ethereum blocks come out, much more often. The original vision was that in relatively short order, on the order of 2 years, 3 years, something like that, Ethereum would transition from proof of work to proof of stake. And proof of stake, I actually really dislike proof of stake. That's another rabbit hole we could go down if we have time. We could save it for another episode. But
I think we're going to end up doing another one at some point.
It's all good.
Yeah.
But so proponents of proof of stake like it for a couple of reasons. One is that it's greener than proof of work. You're not burning the sort of CPU ASIC cycles, right? Another reason is that it allows you to pay less for security, in theory, right? So the sort of block rewards can be a lot less. So the idea was that Ethereum issuance would start quite high, some hundreds of millions of dollars worth of ETH were being issued per year, but that it would drop drastically with the transition to proof of stake.
There's no halving.
No. There's nothing baked into the protocol.
Right.
Okay, but we're getting to that.
Okay, because it's
not automatic. It's manual.
The first monetary policy change I remember was halving the...
Not exactly. I think it was 5 to 3 ETH.
Was it 5 to 3? Right.
I might be slightly off, but roughly. Yeah.
That was 2018?
I think that was Byzantium. I think that was 2017. Really? I think. Okay. Again, I may be off by one here, but this was... I was joining the project around this time, okay? So I think that was 5 to 3 ETH, something like that, maybe 3.5. That was a decision made by the core devs on the core devs call. Now, I participated in the next reduction, which was, again, I don't remember, it was 3 to 2, I think, ETH per block, something like that. And there was a very specific reason this decision was made. And this gets a little bit into the guts of Ethereum, both technically as well as the monetary policy. They're kind of interconnected.
Changing the issuance benefits every holder.
Reducing the issuance benefits every holder.
Yeah.
Sure. Other things being equal.
Yes.
So Ethereum has this coordination mechanism called the difficulty bomb.
Yes. It's like the US debt ceiling.
It's actually a similar mechanism. Yeah.
It's
a very smart mechanism, actually. I like it a lot.
Yeah. Which is not fixed when it should be. The debt ceiling is an argument in Congress.
And we're about to run into it again.
And they're going to have another argument. They're going to probably shut down.
The last time the government was shut down here was, I believe, the end of 2019. I couldn't get my passport renewed. I was fucked. It was really bad. So it actually, I was we were oh, the federal government is far away. Who cares? It actually impacted me.
Yeah, and I assume what happens is there's some horse trading backdoor to get the debt ceiling raised.
Sure.
And the difficulty bomb, my understanding was it was fixed.
Here's the thing: it removes inaction as an option for governance. Right? There must be, at the very least, a coordinated protocol upgrade every 18 months, plus or minus. Right? It's changed over the years, but when I was involved, it was kind of it would start to tick up at something like the 13, 14 month mark, and by about the 18 month mark, it's exponential, right? So the blocks would slow exponentially, and you get to a point where blocks are coming every 30 seconds, every 60 seconds, and then the network would kind of halt slowly, right? So fascinating mechanism, really, really interesting. It was originally put in way back in the day to ensure the transition to proof of stake, because the idea was that there would be opposition among the proof of work miners who wouldn't want to support proof of stake, right? Because they would lose out, basically. Their capital investment would be worthless or worth a lot less, right? And so, again, a very, very smart mechanism was put in. But the thing is, the transition to proof of stake and ETH2 has taken so much longer than expected that the difficulty bomb has been pushed back at least 3 times. I think maybe 4 times by now. Now, here's the thing. This is where things begin to get very interesting and also very complicated. If you look at Ethereum monetary policy as of inception, as of the Genesis block, right? You have to factor in the difficulty bomb, right? Which is to say that the first time it kicked in, which would have been, 2017, something like that, right? Issuance kind of would have halted at that point in time. And the idea was that there should have been a proof of stake chain running by then, but there wasn't. And so every time we push back the difficulty bomb, we increase the issuance. Increase, not decrease, okay? Which means diluting everyone's holdings significantly, actually quite a bit. If the network is 3 years old and you're adding 18 months, like what is that? That's a plus 50% issuance. That's a huge increase in inflation. And so as a result, to counteract that, at least partially, the per block subsidy was reduced. So that's the context of how these decisions were made.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of a halving.
But it's not, because as I said, like it's supposed to be like net neutral kind of.
Yeah.
And again, I think a lot of this nuance is lost when you hear people talk about the ultrasound money meme. Anyway, yeah, so there's 10, 12 people who made these decisions. I was running Python scripts. I was one of these people. I think Vitalik probably chimed in. A couple of other folks did, but none of us are trained economists. None of us. And at least in the decisions that I was a part of, not only did we not get input from economists, it was. I should dig up some of these like Twitter threads or Medium articles. It was kind of put your finger in the air, judge which way the wind is going, and say, okay, we're going to reduce it from 5 to 3. Why not? That sounds like a reasonable number. We don't know what the right amount to pay for issuance is. We don't, genuinely. The best thing we can do is look at what Bitcoin's doing, look at what other networks are doing. Okay, Ethereum Classic was attacked. It's not paying enough. We need to pay more. Okay. Now, in defense, this is all new. There is not, I've actually had conversations with friends who are macroeconomists about this, and they're like, we don't fucking know. Blockchains, macroeconomics as a field is only a few decades old. They have no idea. So that's the answer to your question. It's core devs primarily. Okay. I certainly don't think it's the case that some whale is necessarily
influencing the decision.
No, influencing they are for sure.
Oh, they are.
And I've also had pseudonymous whales reach out to me both in person and online and kind of nudge me one way or the other. So there's people talk about
what's a nudge? Hey, I think you should make this decision. Or, hey, I'll give you this if you make this decision.
Both.
Oh, okay. So there are
Both.
People offering incentives.
Yeah, I've never been threatened or anything like that, but I did have kind of shady figures approach me at parties and dark rooms and say, hey, you don't know me, but I'm this person. I was, influential in the network previously. I'm a big Ethereum bag holder.
So there are people out there offering bribes.
I don't think I was ever actually offered an explicit bribe.
Well,
I was sort of sent funds to do things. Here's I want you to spin up a voting website to vote for ProgPow, which was this possible change in the mining algorithm. Like I said before, here's $1,000 to do it, something like that, right? We're not talking about huge sums of money.
Yeah.
I never was given explicit bribes, but what I was, it's kind of influence peddling. I don't know the exact word for this. Maybe that's not the right word for it, because that would be me selling influence. It was people cozying up to me and saying, hey,
lobbying?
Let's have a beer, let's chat. Yeah, but lobbying suggests it's formalized. It's very informal kind of, right? So there are a lot of...
I'm sure there's a lot of informal lobbying.
There's a lot of strings being pulled, and I heard pretty wild stories about some of these known and unknown bag holders who did have much more direct influence over other participants in these conversations.
Okay.
Well, for example,
I mean, look,
core devs who were very active in these conversations who had, some ETH presale participant billionaire, basically paying them a salary. That probably counts as a form of influence, right?
Yeah, but I'm just trying to think what people would say about Bitcoin. They say, well, look, there are core devs who get paid by Bitcoin.
Sure, I'm not sure there's any difference. I'm not suggesting that, just to be clear, I'm not suggesting anything terribly underhanded is going on. What I am suggesting is that we're not revealing conflicts of interest, and we should be doing that. We should have way more transparency than we have.
Because we pretty much know who every Bitcoin core dev is funded by. Gets announced, I don't know, Coinbase are sponsoring these 2 people.
Human Rights Foundation.
Yeah, Human Rights are doing these projects. Sure. Gemini's doing them. Sure. It's pretty out there.
Sure. This is not really the case in Ethereum. There's little to no transparency around who these folks are in the first place, or how they're funded, basically.
What's Joe Lubin's role in all this? He's the guy. So look, I'm not asking for any kind of accusations, but he's the guy I'm interested in because it feels like it's his project.
Joe,
it feels like Vitalik is the tech director and he's the CEO. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah. So what I know is that he was involved not from the very, very, very beginning, but shortly thereafter, which is to say, kind of like post white paper, pre Genesis. He invested. He was personally paying, I think, probably for a lot of the expenses for the team during the initial process. Because folks like Gavin Wood and Vitalik, probably didn't bring much to the team economically.
He had a lot of Bitcoin as well.
He probably had a lot of Bitcoin. Yeah, he had a background working in finance, et cetera. And he probably almost definitely invested very heavily into the pre-sale, right? So he's definitely a large Ethereum holder. We know that he I shouldn't say we know. My understanding, based on secondhand information, is that he kind of single-handedly funded Consensus's operations for the first few years, and Consensus built some pretty cool shit. So that's probably good for the network.
Built some cool shit for Saudi government.
Is that true? I didn't know that. Oh yeah, there was some partnership. Yeah. Well, look, Consensus got really big really quick and was doing a lot of things in a lot of places. Yeah. I'm not super surprised.
And then it went out to raise a lot of money at one point.
Yeah, and I heard there was a big investment recently by JP Morgan or something. I don't know the details about that stuff.
Interesting.
Look, I think Joe's an interesting figure. I think Consensus is an interesting organization. I think from a governance perspective, it's interesting because it is a second pole in influence to the Ethereum Foundation, right? So when I was active, 2018, 2019, if you were building something, especially at the level one, the layer one, and you wanted funding or support, you really had two choices. You either go to Vitalik or you go to Joe, Uncle Joe.
Uncle Joe.
Yeah.
Sounds creepy.
I think it's a bit different now, right? There's more money and there's more protocols and projects and DeFi, for example, people have deep pockets. So there are probably other sources of influence and funding. But yeah, look, I mean, he has been very influential for a long time in the project. He's pretty open about that. I don't know. Is Consensus mining? Is he personally mining? Maybe, probably.
But you said you used to work in hedge funds. You were helping. You were helping rich people get rich, and you kind of felt you were doing the same at Ethereum. Where specifically do you mean?
Well, this goes back to the pre-sale and the pre-mine.
Okay,
right.
So that changed everything.
70% of the Ether, at that point in time, and the value of the network was in the hands of a small number of people. Joe was probably the largest holder.
So do you believe the Ethereum Foundation is run for the benefit of those people?
Of whom? Of the
decision making for Ethereum? Do you think it's run for the users of Ethereum? And wider benefit, or do you think it's run for the benefit of those people?
I think the Ethereum Foundation is run at the whim of Vitalik Buterin.
Okay, still.
Yeah. I mean, again, as of 2 years ago, I have no idea what's happened since then. I think the governance of the foundation itself is structured in such a way there's a certain number of board seats. I think Vitalik has multiple votes. There's little to no transparency, little to no accountability. Thank goodness Vitalik is not a bad actor, right? I think he's a decent human being and has the best interests of the network at heart. However, it's hypocrisy. And this is I said that sort of pre-mine was the biggest reason I left Ethereum. I think the second biggest reason is hypocrisy. This is an important point to make. Ethereum, to the extent that there is a sort of publicly stated mission, it's, as I was alluding to before, it's about building better human institutions that are more participatory, fair, more transparent, et cetera. And yet, Ethereum governance itself, and specifically the Ethereum Foundation, is none of those things, right? There's no transparency, there's no accountability whatsoever, period.
How does that get fixed then? Sounds like to me it should just be disbanded.
I want to make one important point, which is that, again, we have to be careful about not conflating Ethereum and the Ethereum Foundation, right? I think that in the beginning, it was certainly the case. If you had taken away the Ethereum Foundation in 2015, 2016, Ethereum would have died or never been created.
That's not the case.
That's not the case anymore today. I would have said that, I would have hesitated to say that a couple of years ago. I think it's pretty clear at this point, Ethereum is too big to fail. And if you were to take away the Ethereum Foundation or Consensus for that matter, the network would be just fine today, right? And so Ethereum has succeeded in spite of the dysfunction of the Ethereum Foundation, not because of it being a glorious success.
But would you disband the foundation? Do you think it sounds to me it's just a toxic, disorganized mess. If you disbanded it, you could replace it with something better?
I think we have to be careful how we define you.
Well, I'm asking you your opinion. I'm saying, what is your opinion? You've put yourself out there saying it's failed. Okay, so what should be done?
Yeah, when I said it failed, I was referring to Ethereum governance, not to the foundation specifically.
But isn't foundation of the failure of governance within the foundation the failure of the foundation?
Yes, but again, I was not referring to the foundation. I was referring to the protocol. Two different things. Again, it's really important to not conflate these two in our minds, right?
Governance of the protocol.
So the Ethereum Foundation bootstrapped Ethereum protocol governance.
Yes.
Okay. So like Hudson Jameson, the gentleman I mentioned before, right? He, like me, was a contractor for the foundation. Foundation paid for the Zoom account that was used to host these calls. They're posted in the foundation, YouTube, et cetera. Now, I actually think that should have, a long time ago, should have been moved off of foundation properties onto, I don't know what, that's the question, something that's controlled by the community, right?
Right.
So the Ethereum Foundation has been very active in governance. To give you a very concrete example, when the DAO hard fork happened, when the decision was made in 2016 to do that, there were maybe 10 people on that conversation, 8 or 9 of whom had an affiliation with the Ethereum Foundation.
Fine. So do you think Ethereum governance should be taken out of the Ethereum Foundation and rethought?
Yes. That I can confidently say yes. And there should be, this is kind of what I was trying to do in 2019, was to create a new thing, call it a foundation, maybe an association, some kind of structure. Maybe, I mean, really it's a DAO at the end of the day, that had the transparency, had the accountability to the community, had those structures in place. And that did not happen.
So if you take the governance of Ethereum out of the Ethereum Foundation, the Ethereum Foundation can focus on education.
Giving grants. That's kind of like what it does.
Education, advocacy, supporting different projects, but you remove the conflict of interest that exists between the foundation, the people who run the foundation, and the governance and the people who control the governance of Ethereum. That seems to me like a huge conflict of interest.
Where's the conflict of interest? Is it because they hold a lot of ETH? Is that
because they hold a lot of ETH, and we don't know the different influence levels that happen in different places, who's sponsored by who. It sounds to me like Ethereum governance should be completely separated and rethought. Here's
the thing, right? This is kind of like a circular dilemma, okay? Yeah. Because if you say, take governance away from the foundation, fine, I'm on board with that. I don't love the foundation. Whose hands are you going to put it in, okay? You need a new foundation, or call it a DAO or something, okay? So number one, how do we ensure that the same failures of governance don't happen to the new foundation, if we're going to call it a foundation, right? And I have some ideas I've explained, like increased accountability, transparency, et cetera. There are ways we can do that. But the point I'm trying to make here is that the foundation was created in the first place to do this.
Yeah, fine. But like bootstrapped, you've evolved beyond that point. It sounds like it's not required anymore. I mean, I would be saying, look, Bitcoin governance is successful. It is a success. So why not emulate that model?
I think the best projects that I've seen have, and very few have actually followed through on this, but many intend to. They all say they want to do this, right? Is that they have something, a company or foundation or both, that like bootstraps. It's a good word, right? Kind of bootstraps or stewards this thing into existence and then decentralizes itself and disappears, which is, again, kind of what Shapeshift and Eric's team are trying to do right now. I think that's a great idea. I've heard several folks say that, I wasn't, of course, in the room at the time, but that the original goal of the Ethereum Foundation was exactly this, was to liquidate itself and disappear after the protocol was like functioning and healthy. This is the thing. This is the thing that happens, okay? This is exactly what we as a community are trying to fight back against, is that anytime you have a centralization of power and wealth and influence in the hands of a small number of people, this is true of the Ethereum Foundation, it's true of every, kind of big company or foundation that ever existed. Even if the people who kind of created it go into it with the best of intentions and say to themselves, we're going to remove ourselves, we have no ego in this, et cetera, inevitably, the thing just gets to a place where it just procreates. It just refuses to die, and it's just so hard to do that. It's so easy to delude yourself, either as an individual or as an organization, into thinking just a few more years. We're giving grants, we're educating people, we're doing good things, right? To believe that yourself, even if that's not true objectively, right? And so I guess what I'm getting at is here. This goes back to the hypocrisy I touched upon before. If the Ethereum Foundation were very serious about this, how do you solve this? It's fucking simple, okay? Create a smart contract, transfer all your ETH into it, and set a ticking timer on it. And say this smart contract is going to vanish and take all the funds with it in 1 year or 2 years' time or whatever that is. They could have done this in the beginning. This is what's called a credible commitment, okay? And this is exactly the superpower of Ethereum and of blockchains, is that you can create a credible commitment. It's visible, it's transparent, the whole world can see it. And this is like Dr. Strangelove, you know, that movie way back about the Russia-US nuclear holocaust, and like, you know, the Russians were like, look, we have our nuclear missiles armed and loaded, and they are targeting US cities, and like if we don't intervene, then they're just like, it's just going to trigger, it's just going to happen, right? So like it's what's called a credible commitment, right? They could have done that. They could still do that. They haven't done that. Why? Because they're hypocrites in my mind. Does that make sense? And it was this hypocrisy that kept me up at night, and I was like, I don't want to support this. I don't want to be a part of this.
Because yeah, I get it.
So yes, so we should have / still should create something new that has the accountability and transparency, and transfer gradually or suddenly, I don't know, right, the power and influence to a better mechanism.
But I imagine there's only one person who could make that happen, which is Vitalik.
No, I don't think that's true anymore. I mean, look, I got very close to like forking Ethereum in 2019 and making this happen. And there were a lot of people in the community who thought it was a good idea at the time, because I don't know if we have the option of forking is what I'm saying, right? So any subset of the community could do this. It didn't happen, and I think it's good that it didn't happen, but...
You become Ethereum Cash, it just
maybe. I mean, one of them does.
Too much. Yeah, it's just... I don't think that's the right idea. I
Probably not.
But I wholly understand where you're coming from now, from the hypocrisy level. That kind of makes sense.
Yeah, I think the right thing to do is probably not a fork. It's probably not attacking. It's kind of like live and let live, right? Let the Ethereum Foundation do its thing. It can be as functional or dysfunctional as it wants to be. We're going to be the better people. We're going to go over here and we're going to build something better, right? But then the question becomes, how do you fund it? And that's where things get very tricky, this question of like public goods funding.
So is there any particular shady shit that went on that also that we should be aware of?
This is a good question. I think there was a lot of naivete. And to give a concrete example of this, I was part of a team, right, called the EWASM team. And we were like 10 people. And, we were not sort of treated super well or paid very well. But, we're also given like freedom to travel and things like that. So, it was a kind of a mixed bag. And the Ethereum Foundation around this time in late 2017, early 2018, I think, started giving grants to third parties, projects, things like that. And these grants were, in some cases, 5 figures, some cases 6 figures. I think some of them went up to 7 figures. And we started seeing this grant money leave the foundation, to be clear, coming from the same multi-sig, like the same source of funds as we were getting paid our salaries or fees, I guess, technically, for the work we were doing. And there was no explanation, like no transparency into how those decisions were made. And in one particular case, which I remember, there was this announcement. The Ethereum Foundation would publish these blog posts where they would announce the recipients of the latest round of grants, and you kind of click on it, and you land on the landing page of one of these projects. And the very first thing you see, like I think it was even like above the fold, was like angel investor Vitalik Buterin, things like this. So, again, this is, what is it? It's lack of professionalism. It's lack of kind of disclosure of conflicts of interest. But that's kind of seeing like millions of dollars of grant money flow to projects that directors or stakeholders in the Ethereum Foundation had personally invested in prior to that, friends of Vitalik and kind of friends of other kind of core stakeholders. I don't know how these decisions were made, and I'm not necessarily suggesting it's definitely like nepotism or insider dealing. But what I'm suggesting is, without transparency, without disclosing conflict of interest, we don't know. Yeah, right. There was a lot of this kind of stuff that happened, and that's bad enough on the face of it. It's worse because simultaneously we felt shit on as contractors who were getting. There were PhDs, experts in their field, who were getting paid something like $25 an hour for their work from the Ethereum Foundation. No benefits because we're all contractors. Other people were, I think, probably paid quite well. And I think this had a lot to do with how close you were to the decision makers, how much they like you, stuff like this. No HR. It didn't exist because we're all contractors. No recourse.
What are you working on now?
You want to talk about it? I thought we were agreed not to talk about it.
Well, I think, yeah, but now I think about, because I have to ask another important question.
Yeah.
So it's not that I care about what you're working on, but I have to ask a different question. So I need to know what you're working on now.
Okay. Yeah. So I, in 2019, thought about kind of forking Ethereum, thought about building a better Ethereum, and had a scheme in my mind. Like I had sort of a vision of a different technical roadmap. I kind of, things like proof of stake and sharding, like core aspects of the Ethereum 2 roadmap I kind of disagree with. I had a vision in my mind of what I would build, and I found this project called Space Mesh, which to a large extent overlap with my vision. So this is like a better Ethereum kind of. So I'm
a smart contract platform.
Correct. It's a new smart contract platform called Space Mesh. Yeah.
So my only question is, you know what question I'm going to ask? Will people accuse you of being critical of Ethereum to now promote Space Mesh?
I mean, I have a pretty thick skin. I think you do too. I don't sort of care what people accuse me of. I think if you kind of go back and look at what happened in 2019 and look at kind of the order of operations, all of this stuff that we're talking about here came long before I learned of or got involved in the Space Mesh project, right? Like I became very vocal of my criticism of Ethereum kind of early 2019 and joined that project like late 2019.
Does Space Mesh have a pre-mine? I have to ask that.
It's complicated. I mean, 25% of the total issuance as of 10 years post-Genesis, collectively will go to investors and core team. However, issuance will continue long after that, and it will go down to about 5% over the long term. So also, there's no coins at all issued on, there is no pre-mine, right?
So there's issued from day one.
Nothing is issued on day one. Nothing is issued for the first year. There's a long vesting period, and it vests very, very gradually. So the first year, core team investors get zero.
Okay.
Only the miners have it. And then from that point on, there's gradual issuance. It goes down towards around 5% long term. This has been an internal war on our team, by the way, because I'm trying to fix what Ethereum did. 70% is like way too high.
And also, if
5% is pretty fucking good. You got to be honest about that.
Yeah, but it sounds to me this is a bit more like a company structure.
It's a company that is going to decentralize itself and turn into a community-led DAO and make credible commitments along the lines I was talking about a moment ago. Like, if I have a say in this, and I do, whatever funds are left in the company as of Genesis or shortly after Genesis are going to go into something like a multi-sig with a timer on it. Like I said, it's gonna vanish. Those funds need to be spent or deployed within some reasonable period of time. That's like how you do.
I mean, look, I'm not hugely interested in Space Mesh.
Sure.
I'm more interested in when this is released, the different attack vectors. If people listen to this and they're critical of you, what are the things they might say? That's naturally one. Okay, one other thing, because we could go on for fucking hours. This is fascinating. One last thing. We don't spend too much time on it. Like, is ETH2 ever going to happen? Like, what is the problem? I have no idea. I mean, I don't track it. I just see Marty Bent's ever-growing thread.
Much love to Marty. Marty was here in New York, and he and I were getting into the space at precisely the same time in 2017. So we crossed paths a few times. A lot of love to Marty.
Yeah, a lot of love to Marty. A lot of love for his podcast and his newsletter. But his
podcast is wild.
Yeah.
Like, wild.
But his ongoing email thread regarding ETH2 is kind of funny.
Yeah.
It's like, I've not spent any time looking at it. What's the issue? Like, are they trying to do something that's just not possible and they're going to break ETH?
So it's fascinating. And we could do 2 hours on this easily, right?
Sorry, one other question.
Yeah.
So when ETH2 launches, will there be ETH1 and ETH2? And everyone who has ETH1 will have ETH2 tokens and is essentially getting a dividend.
So actually, that's already true.
It is.
So ETH2, what's called, so it's so complicated. The roadmap has multiple phases in it. Okay, there were originally like 6 phases, and phase 0, programmers with 0 index. It's actually like something like on the order of 7 phases, right? The first phase 0, actually launched in December.
Okay,
so it's been running for 9-10 months now.
Is that Beacon?
Correct. That's the Beacon chain, right? And so the Beacon chain. So the way this works is it is a proof of concept of proof of stake. Mm-hmm. So anyone who holds 32 ETH on ETH1 mainnet can move those 32 ETH into a designated contract on the mainnet, and then that enables them to run one validator on the ETH2 Beacon chain. And therefore, you have effectively moved your mainnet ETH into, people call it BETH, which is Beacon chain ETH. So there are already 2 ETH, and they're not fungible because the funds, like, you can trade your BETH on a secondary market, but that's sort of like trading futures, which is what you were alluding to before. So it's kind of like assuming that what's called the merge with a capital M, right, happens sometime early next year, which is the officially stated plan. Eventually, the two will become one again.
It won't happen.
You don't think so? I think it will happen, but like, I think the thing that has happened is, number one, it's taken way longer than anyone said. Number two, the scope has been reduced dramatically. And so like the original vision was that we're going to have this ETH2 thing running, and it's going to have like 1,000 shards, and each shard is going to look like Ethereum we have now. And the shards are going to be like opaque, which is to say that like you can run an application, doesn't have to care about which shard it's on or which shard it's talking to. Like none of that's going to be the case. There's now a very small number of shards. And by the way, this also changes a lot. And I'm also not super up to date on this. So caveat, like do your own homework. Please cross-check the facts. But my understanding is that there's a small number of shards. Each of these shards they're not going to be like homogeneous. Like they're not going to each look like ETH1 like they were supposed to. Each of them is going to have like what's called a different execution environment. So that's something like roll-ups. Again, it gets very complicated very quickly. But I think that the takeaway here is that each of these shards is a separate ecosystem. You can think about them like separate blockchains, right? And this is also already true of the rollups that we're seeing in Ethereum. These are things like Optimism and Arbitrum. Each of them is a separate ecosystem. So you can kind of like build bridges and move things from like mainnet ETH into one of these rollup ecosystems, or move it to ETH2 or move it among. But each of them is separate, which means that we lose this like composability. So you can't just... It's very complicated.
Is it solving scaling issues? Is this what it's about?
Yes and no. I mean, it solves scaling, but at the cost of you lose this composability. And composability is just like so central to Ethereum. Like the fact that you can build these crazy DeFi things on top of these primitives. Like Maker came along and created DAI, which was like the first stable coin, and other people can build things on top of DAI, and you can have CryptoKitties, and then have someone deploy hats to put on top of your CryptoKitties, all permissionlessly, all composably. A lot of that goes away in like an ETH2 world.
Right. Okay.
And so you sort of an unsolvable problem.
Should they have just built ETH2 on Oracle?
Oracle, the company.
Yeah, I mean...
No, look, I think
I'm saying is, it like, has the concept of what a blockchain can do been taken too far? And
I think what a single blockchain can do is very limited. I think that we are seeing the limits in Ethereum today. I think that it's very disingenuous when folks talk about ETH2 as the solution, the promised land, just over the next hill. Like all our scalability problems are going to go away, because they're not explaining the downsides and these nuances. And I think you also have to look at what projects like Solana are doing. Sorry, I know we're going even further into shitcoin territory here.
But like we've been talking about this week quite a bit, because we've been surrounded by it. And I'm not going to invest. I'm not going to start covering this as projects.
Right. But from a strictly technical perspective, it's very interesting.
Well, context. Like what is, like, I've seen Solana go up to $220. I'm like, what is this thing? And it's like, it's this continual sacrifice of decentralization.
Correct. Exactly.
For scalability.
100%.
And I feel like that is a race to building, to dump in the blockchain and build something on a traditional database. Yeah. But that's permissionless in some way. And maybe someone's going to, you're a fucking idiot. That doesn't make sense.
I mean, it can't be permissionless or censorship resistant by definition if it's not decentralized. Like the way that Bitcoin gets these properties that we all know and love is by being so fucking decentralized.
But from what I've been told about Solana, I would argue that it's not really decentralized.
I think their gamble is that it's decentralized enough.
Yeah.
Right. And I will give them one fact, which is that most degens trading NFTs and digital rocks don't care as much about decentralization as you and I and the people in El Salvador and places like that.
I don't think they care at all.
Well, if they didn't care at all, then they shouldn't be on a blockchain in the first place. They should be using Firebase.
I just don't think it's an issue. Either if you care about decentralization, then you care about maximum decentralization.
You're saying that it's all or nothing.
When you don't care as much about decentralization, I think you don't really care about this.
It's a slippery slope. Yeah. I think we'd agree about this.
Yeah,
and once you start going in that direction, you start making compromises, then... look, I'm with you. The reason
I think these people are just having fun.
Yeah.
Basically, I think they're having fun, they're making money, they're trading rocks, they're trading tokens, cup rockets and dog coins, and they're having fun. And from a distance, I'm watching them have fun, and then I'm in this little world here where I'm arguing about the state and the Fed, and I'm watching all these people over there have fun. It's like I'm in a business meeting in a Vegas hotel, and I can see through the glass windows all the people that they're down there and they're on the roulette wheel and they're drinking, having fun, and I'm up there.
But so I'm with you 100%. I really like this characterization, but it's even worse because they're winning and they're making money hand over fist.
I know.
And folks like you and I are here, like trying to do real work and like move the needle for humanity. It's very hard to focus. But it was also like this in 2017. So
I know, and I was having fun in 17, but I was with Travis Kling the other day, and Danny, I was just like saying, I'm not rich, but like I am at my wealthiest moment in my life right now, and I feel poor.
Yeah, I'm with you.
I'm like, look at all these people making so much money.
Yeah.
They're buying rock JPEGs for 2.3. Like, they're buying fucking JPEGs for more money than I've ever had.
It really shows you how much wealth there is sloshing around out there.
And I'm like, no, we've got to move the world forward. I'm principled in doing this. And also, like, can't do that because all these people are yelling at me. I mean, like, the reason I don't want to have the fight anymore, because they're two different things. Yeah. Like, why fight these people? It's like fighting to close down.
They're not the enemy. Yeah.
Just they're not. They aren't the enemy. The enemy is the Fed. The enemy is the pound, the dollar, the euro, the people making those 100%, decisions.
100%.
That's the enemy. They're not even competing for Bitcoin. And actually, do you know what? I spoke to Devin Held the other day, and he said, "Cool, you made a load of money on Dogecoin. You made a load of money on Solana. This is why you should put some in Bitcoin.
Yeah, exactly.
And put it and hold it for the long term.
Yeah.
And this is what I think Udi's point is.
Yeah.
It's like, why are we having this fight? If we can call it a shitcoin if we think it's a shitcoin. We can call it not competition, but it's like we actually can we can criticize the project, but embrace bringing those people into Bitcoin.
Sure.
And
Bitcoin could do a better job of this. I mean, one of the reasons I joined the Ethereum ecosystem in 2017 and didn't become a Bitcoin core contributor was because Ethereum folks were so warm and welcoming and Bitcoiners were not.
I mean, look, it's different. Like, the blanket statements like that sometimes don't work, because I've had a mixed response to Bitcoiners. Some are absolute shits to me. Actually, some of them absolute fucking cunts to me. But mostly everyone's great. Yeah. And I've had a brilliant time, right? Yeah. But there can be a better job done in terms of, like, I want to separate. I always want to separate what's the protocol to everything else.
Sure.
2017 fork wars, absolutely protect the protocol.
And it's interesting because that is precisely when I just coincidentally joined the ecosystem. And so this was what I was exposed to, was this vitriol, like in the very beginning.
Yeah, and I didn't understand it.
Civil war.
This is what me and Danny were chatting about. We didn't understand what was at stake because we just joined. It's like, it's this.
There you go.
Maybe big blocks, maybe small blocks. Let's see how this works out. Now, if it happened, because I've done 4 years, it's like, oh, I get it now. Yeah. Like, absolutely protect that. Fine.
This goes precisely back to what we were just talking about, the slippery slope of how much decentralization is enough.
Yeah, and I absolutely fundamentally support that. What I don't fundamentally support is the harassment and abuse and targeting of people for having a different opinion. You can think they're wrong.
Right.
Giacomo Zucco thinks everything outside of Bitcoin is a scam and a shitcoin. Mr. Hodl does, and that's fine. They should be allowed to make their points.
Right.
I don't, but I don't even see the benefit of having that argument. Tell people, like, I get a lot of people write to me all the time telling me, I know you're a Bitcoin only, but what do you think of this? I said, look, I'm not interested. I'm happy to play the long game with Bitcoin.
Sure.
Right. And by the way, and this is why, let's have that conversation.
Sure.
But I can't keep dealing in this like endless war that achieves nothing, because the other problem it creates, just this conversation alone as an example, I'm naturally thinking about, how do I release this so people don't say, oh, look, Pete's a shitcoiner now. Pete's going to launch what Ethereum did. Which, none of that's going to happen.
What Ethereum didn't.
But I want to have this conversation.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I'm going to do Ethereum shows for the rest of the year.
Right.
I'm not going to cover Solana.
Please don't.
I'm not. It's going to be a Bitcoin show. But I naturally have to think about that. And also, it's almost like the coercive language around what I said, my point, what Udi's trying to do. I think he's trying to say you can be a Bitcoin maxi without being a massive twat.
Sure.
Matt Corallo does it brilliantly.
Yes, agreed.
Jonas Schnelli does it brilliantly.
Yeah.
You know, a bunch of these people have done way more for Bitcoin than a lot of these fucking morons, hodl morons online, and they're more composed with the way they do things. So I'm trying to take this different approach with it now, but it gets a bit complicated.
Look, I think this speaks to a bigger malaise we have in society around cancel culture and the rise of wokeism. It's a similar phenomenon. Like, what does liberalism really mean? Liberalism really means a marketplace of ideas, right? Liberalism really means, like, not only tolerating, but intentionally exposing oneself to, like, conflicting opinions and having these conversations constructively and respectfully. I think you do a great job of this. But I mean, dude, this is, if something's going to destroy our society, it's this.
Danny, how many times have people tried to cancel me in the last 2 years?
A handful.
Yeah, handful of times. Bitcoiners have tried to cancel.
Sure. You're probably getting it from both sides, right? You're getting Bitcoiners to say you're not maximal enough. And then you have...
And they're becoming the thing they hate. Okay. And I don't think it's everyone.
I agree with that.
I think it's a small group of idiots that people don't want to stand up to.
Right. Because the risks are asymmetric. Like the risk of the downside risk is far greater than the upside risk.
I mean, I don't give a fucking about.
I don't either.
Literally, if you want to cancel me, you're listening, try. 4 attempts. One very
lawsuits and things.
No, well, that as well. I've had one very specific one, which I'm not going to go public about. That was a very direct attack on my income. Like, fucking bring it on now. Like, don't become the thing you hate.
Yeah.
You know, don't become the thing you hate. But
that's a great motto.
Yeah, because
Bitcoin is about freedom at the end of the day, right? Like live and let live. What do they call it? One of the Burning Man principles is radical self-expression. You know, like...
I think the point Udi's trying to make, and I'm going to talk to him about, he's saying that, and some people disagree. Some people are of the opinion Bitcoin wins whatever. And that's fine, cool. I think he's of the opinion that Bitcoin may lose the war of narrative. Like there is a war of narrative. It may lose that war of narrative at some point. I don't think it does. I think the reality is we have a country that's made Bitcoin legal tender, and I think we're going to get more. And I think in the end, Bitcoin's governance and monetary policy is why it wins. But I just think there's different ways we can approach people who have different opinions. It's conversations like this.
Sure.
It's not, I can't yell at anyone anymore. I joined that. Everything's a shit going. I just can't do it.
This is why I'm like way less active on crypto Twitter than I used to be.
It doesn't scale as well. Like the arguments that you have at 1,000 and 10,000, 100 and 300,000, you get through it. It just doesn't scale. Like I used to phone Danny, like sometimes like almost counseling me, like every week I'd be walking around the park for 2 hours saying, how do I manage Twitter now? Because like, it doesn't matter what I say. Like it's just a shit show.
I found myself like once people started listening to me, I found myself self-censoring, and I hated that because again, the risks are asymmetric. Like the upside of saying something, you know, okay, you might have some people pile on and say, yeah, thumbs up, I like that. But the risks of saying something that, you know, triggers people.
I think for me, Twitter's now broadcast rather than conversation. Right. And it's conversation with people I follow and we mutually follow. Right. But it's mainly broadcast. It just doesn't scale. But wow, listen, look, this has been fucking brilliant. I'm so glad we met in El Salvador. I'm really glad we did this. I think there's a lot that people will enjoy about this. I may have got some things wrong technically or made some shitty points. Apologies for that.
I may have as well.
Well, we know I'm not technical, but like, I think your story's fascinating. I'm glad you told it. I think there's things that Bitcoiners can learn from this. I think there's
hope so.
that Ethereum's can learn from this. I think we should definitely get back together and do something next year. When I'm in Austin, we spoke about that. Let's do something else. I'm going to read that article, and all the best with everything, man. Like, stay in touch. This was great.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I've learned a lot from this conversation as well, and I think if folks like you and I can sit down and have this kind of like civil, respectful conversation, I mean, hopefully, you know, we can inspire others in cross-chain ecosystem kind of do the same thing.
Not something I support. Put all your money in Bitcoin. But look, happy to talk to you. Like I say, I think there's a big lesson to be learned in some of this, and I'm really interested in see the feedback. It might just blow over. Blow over.
It's possible. You never know.
You might have to spend a week in hiding.
I'm used to it. It's okay.
All right. Listen, good luck. Stay in touch.
Thank you. Enjoy New York.
Yeah. Love the city.